Story 1.
Husband discovers wife cheating, uncovers her ongoing affair, exposes the truth, and files for divorce. Mark, weighing 325 lbs, and Sarah, having lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about Mark's health. In short, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, Mark shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 lbs, but contemplated quitting after losing 118 lbs. After all, the journey had been arduous. When Mark expressed his desire to quit, Sarah adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story. If Mark quit, he would only receive closeness 4 times a year, prompting Sarah to seek fulfillment elsewhere due to her lovemaking needs. In the moments following Sarah's threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when Mark's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked as she witnessed sadness and hurt in his eyes as a result of her words. The marriage's foundation crumbled, as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Sarah realized immediately that she had made a critical mistake. Sarah had pushed her beloved man to his limits to fulfill her desires for weight loss, then threatened infidelity as punishment. She questioned her own actions, realizing the impact on Mark. Mark expressed frustration, emphasizing the tremendous effort he had put into losing over 100 lbs for Sarah's sake. He accused her of using closeness as a tool to manipulate him, expressing disappointment at her reward of continued deprivation and potential infidelity. Mark believed Sarah had jeopardized their marriage, introducing chaos into their home. He questioned her trustworthiness and speculated about her thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, he felt Sarah had ruined their marriage, leaving him uncertain about what to believe. Sarah expressed regret, insisting that she never intended to engage in infidelity. Despite her plea, Mark, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation and a few minutes later left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to contemplate the situation. In the garage, Mark declared his need for time to think, leaving Sarah in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt planted in Mark's mind and understanding the challenge of dispelling it. Reflecting on her actions, Sarah admitted her lack of consideration for Mark's feelings. She acknowledged her greed and desire for more, despite Mark's previous efforts. Now she recognized the need to regain what she had lost. Mark, spending about an hour in the garage, engaged in activities to occupy his hands while contemplating the complexities of the situation. He didn't really think his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but he wasn't sure. Earlier in the day, he would have been sure, but now, after her comment, he just couldn't be sure anymore. He didn't know either if she would have cheated on him in the future. Earlier, he would have never believed it, but now he wasn't sure anymore. He said out loud, "I need to find out." Mark walked back into the house. Sarah remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed, with red eyes and a red nose, a result of her recent tears. Mark observed her condition, feeling a sense of regret, yet he remained resolute in carrying out his decision. He communicated to Sarah his decision to abandon the diet, informing her that he would restrict their carnal moments to the previously agreed upon 4 times a year, or even none at all, leaving the choice to her discretion. Mark warned of severe consequences if she chose to engage in relations with someone else, expressing his intent to inflict physical damage on her potential lover. Mark sternly addressed Sarah, asserting that any infidelity on her part would lead to an immediate end of their relationship. He emphasized that he would not tolerate staying married to a cheater and labeled her as a fancy woman, indicating his lack of tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared his mistrust and announced his intention to closely monitor her actions, cautioning her to be exceedingly careful. Concluding his message, Mark mentioned his departure for a while, indicating his absence for lunch, but assuring his presence for dinner. He offered the option of ordering food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving the atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. Mark grabbed his car keys off the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Sarah heard the garage door open and she heard Mark's car drive away. Sarah said out loud, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. How could I be so stupid?" She began sobbing again and just sat there, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour or so later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then went and lay on her bed and cried some more. When Mark arrived home later that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like so many husbands who suspected his wife of cheating, Mark decided to do some detective work on his own. He thought the easiest way to start was to drive to the telephone providers and request a printout of call logs on their home phone and on his wife's cell phone. Both were in his name, so he knew he would not have any trouble getting the reports. The landline phone company told him he could have it electronically, and they were able to upload the call logs for the last 3 years onto a CD for him for a small fee. He gladly paid it and walked out of the office with everything he asked for. Yes, he requested 3 years because he wanted to be able to go back before he had started the diet, to see if there had been any motivation for Sarah cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company and requested identical data. They hesitated at first since it was his wife's cell phone number he wanted the data for, but Mark pointed out that it was indeed a joint account with his name prominently on the records, so they had no reason to withhold any information he might request. They offered the data electronically as well for a fee of $120. Mark thought it excessive, but probably worth the money so he could more easily access the information. He did make a note, though, that perhaps he would rethink his cell phone provider in the future. Arriving at home around 4 p.m., Mark saw Sarah lying on their bed, sound asleep. He decided to let her sleep and went back to their home office, locking the office door so he would not be interrupted. He sat down at the computer and downloaded all of the data from the 2 CDs into a folder in his documents file. He had already formulated how he would conduct his search. He was going to start with 2 years ago and compile a list of every telephone number called in that first month when he started his diet and when Sarah had. Restricted his closeness to 4 times a year, plus rewards for goals achieved. That would have been September of 2008. On their home phone, September had 96 calls to 19 different numbers. He found that, using the format the phone company had provided for him, he could sort the data in a number of different ways, so he created a list by numbers, showing the number, the date, the time, and the duration of the call. Once he got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create that list for every call made from their home phone in the last 2 years. He was just about ready to start the same process on Sarah's cell phone data when he heard the office doorknob rattle. The door was locked, so no one could come in, so he saved everything he had been doing and stashed away all evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went and opened the door to find the most pitiful sight he could imagine. There stood Sarah in a seriously disheveled state, hair a mess, eyes and nose red from crying and sniffling every once in a while. She had her head bent down and only reluctantly looked up and into Mark's eyes. She expressed deep remorse to Mark, acknowledging the hurt and anger she caused. Sarah recognized her own selfish and cruel actions, admitting that she overstepped by interfering with his diet progress. She apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and acknowledging that the decision to continue the diet should have been solely his, despite feeling the overwhelming influence of the situation. She pleaded with Mark to forgive her. Mark conveyed his forgiveness to Sarah, emphasizing that it was granted only based on the information available to him at the moment. He expressed his love for her and reminded her of the sacrifices he made during the 2-year struggle with his weight, including abstaining from closeness, all done for her. However, he admitted that he had reached a breaking point and could no longer continue. Mark addressed the current situation, describing it as a gorilla in the room that needed to be addressed. He stressed the importance of knowing definitively whether or not she had cheated on him, as the uncertainty would drive him crazy. Mark outlined the conditions for their relationship moving forward, stating that if she had not cheated in the past and did not plan to in the future, they could be okay. However, he made it clear that he needed assurance. He held Sarah accountable for creating the mess with her hasty comment and threat, expressing his disbelief at her lack of consideration for his feelings and the damage it caused to his trust in her. Mark highlighted the need for her to deal with the consequences until he felt confident in their relationship. Sarah, who was hoping he would just forgive her and forget what she had said, thought, "I suppose I deserved everything that was happening to me, but I hoped it could all go away." She nodded her head slowly in resigned agreement and turned and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She lay on her bed again, not sobbing but with tears streaking her face. Mark opened the bedroom door and asked Sarah, "Do you want something to eat?" Sarah said, "No, Mark, I am not hungry." Mark walked out to his car and drove off again to a place nearby called Grisham's. He and Sarah had gone there for drinks many times, and their food was excellent. He knew he could have a few beers and a greasy but delicious bacon cheeseburger. In the 2 years previous, he had not had more than 2 beers in a week's time, and not 1 bacon cheeseburger. Tonight, he was going to give in and have what he wanted. He knew that he would never allow himself to get overweight like he had been before, but tonight, he was going to splurge and enjoy his dinner, even though his heart was breaking. When he got home, he went back to the office and began working on the call log from Sarah's cell phone. Because he already knew the drill, it was easier to finish the cell phone list, and he was done in half the time. After reviewing the two lists, Mark determined that over the course of 2 years, they had 3,482 calls made in total, from a total of 45 different telephone numbers. He decided to sort the calls by telephone number and had some surprising results. There were almost 300 calls to his cell phone, about 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar number of calls to Sarah's parents' number. There were close to that many to each of Sarah's sisters, and about half that number to his brother John. In addition, there was a scattering of calls to various friends whose numbers Mark recognized and a few to other numbers he didn't recognize. Going down the list, though, he discovered that there were over 200 calls to a number he didn't recognize, and another 50-plus calls to a second number he didn't recognize. Then he realized there were some calls, 30 or more, to additional numbers that were made over the course of 2 years. He assumed those might be hair salons, stores, church, etc. None of those statistics bothered Mark much, so he just noted them and went back to the 2 major unrecognizable numbers. Being the type of guy Mark was, he decided to refine his research a little more and sorted the calls by day and time for those 2 numbers. The surprising results gave him the chills, and almost immediately he was burning up with suspicion and anger. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., Mark attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant with meeting rooms. They convened in conference for an hour, took a 1-hour lunch break, and concluded their business by 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m., consistently every week at 10:55 a.m. Without fail, there was a call to him on his cell phone. Yes, some weeks were missed, but Mark instantly recognized those were the weeks he was on vacation. But the rule remained, every Wednesday at 10:55 a.m. and at 11:05 a.m. Every Wednesday a call was made to the first of the 2 numbers Mark didn't recognize. He was burning up now. It seemed too much of a coincidence not to be suspicious. Mark knew at that moment that what he was going to discover would not bring him joy. Persevering, he looked at the second number and quickly realized that these calls were consistently placed on Fridays. On Friday afternoons, once a month, Mark played golf with his brother and their best friends. Finishing the 18 holes around 5:30 p.m., they would stop in the clubhouse for a couple of drinks before heading home, usually reaching home before 6:30 p.m. on those Fridays. He would shower and take Sarah out to eat. What angered him was that Sarah always called him just before he teed off to express her love and let him know she would be waiting when he finished his round and got home. Mark now understood what was going on, but he lacked visual proof or knowledge of the person with whom she was cheating. The scary part was wondering how long it had been going on and if it started only when Sarah cut him off or if it began earlier. So he extended his investigation another year and discovered that the same calls were made once a month for the 3 months before he was cut off. Whatever Sarah was doing, she had been doing it 3 months earlier, but not as frequently. All he had to do now was figure out who and then decide what he was going to do about it. Mark thought finding out who would be easy. He ran a reverse lookup on the first number and found it to be a cell phone number not listed. He ran the reverse lookup on the second number and discovered it was listed to a Tony Bali. Of course, Mark knew exactly who Tony BT he was. He was Mark's trainer at the gym. Sarah had initially found him for Mark, so Sarah was calling Tony on the Fridays when Mark golfed. Mark thought. He noted the address in his call log spreadsheet and decided to go out again for a while. Upon returning to Grisham's, Mark had a couple more beers. When things quieted down after the dinner rush, he approached the rather attractive bartender, Brenda, seeking help. He briefly explained the situation and requested Brenda to determine if the first number belonged to Tony. He dialed the number and instructed Brenda to ask for Tony, and if it was him, to mention that a woman had given her the number as a potential trainer. If it was Tony, she should tell him that if he had openings, she would stop by the gym one of these days. Brenda, after taking the phone, inquired if the person on the other end was Tony. She explained that she was Jennifer, a woman she didn't know, who had received Tony's name from someone at her hair salon. The suggestion was made during a conversation about getting in better shape. Jennifer provided some personal details, mentioning her age, 24, height, 5 feet 6 inches, and current weight, around 130 lbs. Despite feeling a bit scrutinized over the phone, she acknowledged that she could improve her fitness and happiness by reaching a weight of around 115 lbs. Expressing gratitude for the compliment, Jennifer inquired about Tony's availability. Upon learning that an opening had recently become available due to a client quitting, she expressed her interest. Jennifer indicated her intention to visit Tony in a couple of days to discuss the necessary steps to achieve her fitness goals. She thanked Tony and concluded the conversation, looking forward to meeting him soon. Mark sat there in amazement at what Brenda just did. She verified that it was Tony from the gym and discovered that, indeed, he did smack on women who used him as a trainer. She even verified that he had an opening because of a dropout. Mark thought that dropout had to be him. Damn, Sarah already called Tony to tell him what happened and to warn him to be ultra careful. The funny thing, though, as he sat there feeling lower than dirt, was the humor in what Brenda had said. He didn't know or care how much she actually weighed. She was hot just like she was. She didn't need to lose an ounce anywhere. Mark smiled at her and told her she was too funny and that he thought she was perfect the way she was, so she better stay away from Tony. He said, "No one could have a more perfect body than you do, Brenda." Brenda responded to Mark's compliment with a beautiful smile, expressing gratitude and addressing him as a kind sir. She acknowledged Mark's attractiveness, describing him as a hunk and expressing confusion about why his wife would seek companionship elsewhere. Mark, reciprocating the smile, acknowledged Brenda's words. Mark admitted that 2 years ago he might not have been considered a hunk, but he firmly stated that it didn't justify his wife's act of cheating. He thanked Brenda for her assistance, both in gathering information about Tony and boosting his deflated ego. Mark expressed his appreciation and mentioned that he should head home. He thanked Brenda once more for her support and understanding. Mark went home, and because it was late, he just went to bed. As he crawled into bed, he looked across at Sarah and was hit with a feeling of loss and disappointment. He didn't think he had ever been this low in his life, but he was also certain that before it was all over he would feel even worse. Sarah had awakened slightly when he crawled in and said, "I love you, Mark." Mark just grunted at that and turned away from her, trying to sleep. Of course, he couldn't get to sleep right away and just lay there thinking for quite a while. He was certain that he heard a sob or two from Sarah, but she obviously had calmed down somewhat. In the morning, Mark woke up to find Sarah spooned against him, her body pressing into his back. Sensing his arousal, she reached around and placed her hand on him. Expressing remorse for her previous words and requesting closeness, Mark, aware of his vulnerability, resisted the temptation, citing the need to get going that morning and the established boundaries. Mark reminded Sarah of the cutoff he had communicated earlier, emphasizing that such attempts should not be repeated. He left the bed, showered, and headed to work. Sarah, left alone, muttered to herself about deserving the consequences of her words and the accompanying emotional pain. Upon reaching work, Mark confided in his boss about the issues at home, briefly explaining the situation and receiving support. The boss advised him to take any necessary time off to address his suspicions. Mark's boss also provided the name of a reputable electronics distributor for surveillance equipment. Expressing gratitude, Mark informed his boss that he would be taking time off from Wednesday through Friday, planning to pursue his suspicions. The boss, understanding Mark's intentions, wished him good luck with a smile. Mark went to the electronics distributor's location and found out that his boss had called ahead and instructed them to assist him with whatever he needed. Visual evidence seemed challenging for him, but he felt recording was manageable. He acquired 3 top-of-the-line bugs with battery life sufficient to transmit many hours of activity to a receiver within a couple of city blocks when the operator downloaded the data. When Mark got home, a special dinner awaited him on the table, his favorite lasagna with garlic bread and sweet green peas. He thanked Sarah for the wonderful meal and excused himself to go and watch some television. Sarah cleaned up the kitchen and joined him in the TV room, being cautious not to push in too close. At bedtime, she headed to their bedroom, giving Mark the chance to plant one of the bugs inside their home phone, ensuring a complete record of every conversation on that phone. Both parties in the conversation would be heard. Though nervous about bugging Sarah's cell phone, he decided to proceed without worrying too much. It only took a few minutes, and he was done. Now he had a source of information from either phone. The challenging part Mark faced was planting a bug in Tony's phone. While Mark already had bugs on Sarah's phones, he considered the possibility that she might use a different phone, such as a payphone, to communicate with Tony. To cover all bases, Mark decided to try bugging Tony's phone, recalling that Tony worked closely with a well-built blonde woman on Wednesday mornings. Mark suspected their interactions and felt the need to gather more information. He planned to seize the opportunity when Tony was preoccupied with the blonde woman to discreetly install the bug. Mark envisioned Tony being so engrossed with the blonde woman that he wouldn't notice Mark's actions. He went to the gym and saw Tony's phone sitting on his towel about 10:50. From where Tony was with the blonde, it would be risky to get the phone, but he thought, what the hell do I have to lose? He snuck in, slipped the phone into his pocket, backed out of the gym, and went into the men's room. There, he easily inserted the bug into Tony's phone. The tricky part would be getting the phone back on the towel. When he returned to the gym, he could see that Tony was wrapping it up with the blonde. He knew he would never make it to the towel and back without being spotted. Damn, he thought. How am I going to do this? After a few seconds, he decided to try to slide the phone across the floor to the towel, hoping to get it close enough so Tony wouldn't be suspicious. It involved some risk, but he went ahead and slid the phone. Despite making some noise, Tony, engrossed in the blonde, remained oblivious. Fortunately, he slid it forcefully enough for it to reach the towel, hitting it hard and sliding underneath. It was perfect. Mark believed there was no way Tony could be suspicious now, so he swiftly left the gym. At precisely 10:55 a.m., his cell phone rang. It was Sarah. She said she wanted to touch base before his meeting. Of course, Mark never disclosed that he was off work the rest of the week, let alone skipping the meeting. After about 10 minutes, Mark began monitoring the bugs using the receiver from his car. Tony's phone rang and he picked up quickly. Tony greeted Sarah, asking if she wanted to meet at his house as usual. Sarah expressed caution, stating Mark was highly suspicious and they might need to quit meeting for a while to avoid trouble. Tony grumbled, reluctant to give up their encounters. Mark groaned as he heard Sarah's response. Acknowledging the risk, she admitted that the first time they had closeness, she knew she'd do anything to be with him. She, initially, cut Mark off to enjoy their time more with Tony. Though she loved him, she couldn't take the chance now. She suggested they might resume their weekly encounters in a few weeks. But in the meantime, Tony would have to be content with one of his other girlfriends. Sarah wasn't jealous of Tony's other relationships and proposed considering meeting on the Fridays Mark went golfing. She needed time to think about it and promised to let Tony know if it could work out. Mark had suffered enough, making him sick and angry. He was determined to get revenge. Having endured Tony's advances even before he started the diet, she had used the diet as an excuse to enhance her encounters with Tony for the past 2.5 years. Sarah had been meeting with Tony every Wednesday and on the monthly golfing Fridays, totaling over 100 encounters. Mark questioned how she could claim to love him while engaging in such behavior and speculated about the possibility of other involvements. Regardless, Tony's involvement alone was enough for Mark to decide on revenge against both of them. Over the next 2 days, he devised plans, established contacts, and ensured favorable conditions for the weekend. Monitoring phone taps, Mark discovered that Sarah had arranged a beautician appointment for Friday morning. In a conversation on Thursday, in the conversation with her beautician, Janine, Sarah explained her desire for a new and sexy hairstyle to distract Mark from suspicions of infidelity. She mentioned the intention to purchase provocative lingerie to further divert his attention. When asked about Tony, Sarah admitted she might temporarily reduce their encounters but laughed it off, suggesting it wasn't a permanent decision. Despite the laughter, Mark felt devastated by the revelations, yet his anger began to drive him, burying the hurt deep inside. Tony initiated contact on Friday, proposing an immediate rendezvous with Sarah. She expressed her intense desire but conveyed her reluctance due to the risk involved, asking for patience until Mark's suspicions subsided. With each conversation, Mark's heartbreak deepened. Struggling to comprehend any love in their relationship, he perceived Sarah's actions as purely selfish, devoid of concern or respect for him. Mark pondered where things had gone wrong but remained determined to carry out his revenge. On Saturday, after lunch, the doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find Brenda, who introduced herself as a friend of Mark's. Brenda mentioned Mark's approval for her to spend time by the pool. Sarah, taken aback, agreed to show her to the pool. However, Brenda noticed Sarah's lack of a smile, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. Shortly after, Sally and Linda arrived, both informing Sarah that Mark had invited them to use the pool. They shared their connections with Mark, Sally having worked with him for years, and Linda having served them at Grisham's. Sarah, confronted with the presence of 3 attractive women, began to feel uneasy, contemplating various possibilities. The 3 women settled on chaise lounge chairs, applying suntan lotion to themselves. It didn't take them long to agree to apply sunscreen to each other to ensure they didn't miss any spots. Once they were thoroughly coated, they lay on the loungers and began soaking in the sun. Shortly afterward, they decided an all-over tan would be better. Each woman untied the strings on their bikini tops and dropped them on the towel beside the lounger. Sarah was upset and wanted to ask them to leave, but since Mark had invited them, she had to tread lightly, knowing she was already on thin ice with him. At 3:30 p.m., Brenda approached Sarah and took a seat, revealing that she worked as a bartender at Grisham's. She disclosed that on the night Sarah issued the ultimatum, Mark had stopped by for a few drinks and shared all the details about their situation. Sarah appeared startled, and Brenda expressed her belief that Sarah had made a significant mistake. Continuing, Brenda informed Sarah that Mark was now suspicious and actively investigating their situation. She conveyed Mark's warning to Sarah, stating that if he discovered past or future infidelity, he intended to be carnal with Brenda, Sally, and Linda for each instance of cheating. Sarah, shocked, attempted to respond, but Brenda interjected, adding that Mark also planned to question Sarah, and if she lied, he would be carnal with one of them for each lie. Brenda hinted that they found Mark attractive and were open to being carnal with him. Brenda, already aware of Sarah's past infidelity, anticipated Mark's carnal involvement with her. She also anticipated that Sarah, in an attempt to conceal her actions, would likely lie, leading to a busy time for Mark satisfying the three women. Sally joined Brenda and took a seat, sharing that she had known Mark for several years and always found him handsome and sweet. Despite his weight gain, she believed he remained the same sweet guy she had known. Sally admitted to having a crush on him, which had only intensified since he lost the excess weight. She acknowledged the troubles between Sarah and Mark and expressed her willingness to pursue a relationship with Mark, stating that he could have her anytime he wanted. Linda also chimed in, expressing that she had been observing Sarah and Mark for a couple of years. She noticed the love Mark showed for Sarah, and she made it clear that she had her eye on them. Linda's statement suggested her interest in Mark and her observation of their relationship dynamics. Linda acknowledged Mark's kindness and consideration toward Sarah, expressing admiration for their relationship. She mentioned feeling fortunate to witness such a loving connection and admitted to fantasizing about being in Sarah's position. Linda acknowledged Mark's remarkable weight loss of 118 lbs to make Sarah happy and his transformation into a hunk. She conveyed her admiration for him and expressed a desire to have a man like him in her life. At precisely 4 p.m., as planned, Mark walked out onto the pool deck, observing the presence of Sarah and the three women. He greeted Sarah and commented on the women's improved tans. Mark playfully remarked on the women's beautiful bodies, suggesting they might give him a hard time. He encouraged Sarah to join in the playful banter and jokingly asked why she hadn't removed her top. Sarah, upset by the afternoon's events, reluctantly complied. Mark then posed 2 questions to Sarah, emphasizing the need for honest answers. He inquired if, at any point during their marriage, she had cheated on him. Sarah firmly denied any infidelity. Mark pressed further, specifically mentioning Tony from the gym. Sarah maintained her denial, expressing confusion about where such an idea originated. Mark continued to question Sarah about her involvement with Tony, mentioning their regular Wednesday meetings and Friday afternoons when he played golf. Despite Mark's detailed knowledge of her affair, Sarah, shocked, stuck to her denial, hoping he lacked concrete evidence. Each of the women present, Brenda, Sally, and Linda, sat with satisfied grins, anticipating the unfolding revelation. Mark proceeded to expose the evidence he had gathered, including phone logs from both the landline and Sarah's cell phone. He described the pattern of calls, pointing out the regularity of her contact with Tony. Mark even had Brenda call the number, confirming it belonged to Tony. Although Mark didn't possess pictures of Sarah and Tony together, he expressed his conviction that the weekly calls were not innocent. In shock, Sarah realized the extent of Mark's knowledge, understanding that their relationship was about to face significant challenges. As she attempted to respond, Mark intervened, stating that there was little to be said and nothing that could convince him of her innocence. Despite his deep love for her, Mark admitted that his current emotions, hurt, disgust, and anger, outweighed his love. Mark introduced the 3 women, Sally, Linda, and Brenda, explaining their connections to him. He described Sally as a longtime work associate, acknowledging her beauty and sweetness. Mark disclosed that he was aware of Sally's crush on him, but he never acted on it out of respect for his marriage to Sarah. Sally smiled, recognizing their genuine friendship. Linda's acquaintance with Mark began during their visits to Grisham's when she served them. Mark revealed Linda's fantasy of being with them, emphasizing her admiration for him. He complimented Linda's physical attributes, particularly praising her chest. Mark expressed his intention to indulge in the experience with Linda. Brenda, the newest acquaintance, was introduced as a seasoned bartender who showed empathy and compassion during a conversation about Mark's distress at Grisham's. Mark highlighted Brenda's assistance in obtaining information and forming a connection with her. As Mark spoke, Sarah teetered on the edge of a breakdown. Visibly emotional, tears flowed, and her breathing became erratic. Despite her desire to convey something to Mark, she remained silent. Mark, acknowledging the interest expressed by the 3 women, revealed his anticipation of enjoying carnal encounters with them, exploring sensuality in every aspect. However, he reiterated his commitment to not be unfaithful in his marriage and expressed the need to end the marriage with Sarah to pursue these relationships. Mark conveyed his reluctance to violate his pledge and asserted that terminating the marriage was the only solution. Brenda produced divorce papers from her bag and informed Sarah, a bartender by night and a process server by day, that she was being served. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotions, broke into tears at the delivery. In an attempt to plead with Mark, she apologized profusely and expressed her love, pleading with him to reconsider. Mark responded, expressing doubt about Sarah's love, citing her actions over the past 2 years as evidence. He emphasized that the issue went beyond a couple of instances, believing it occurred over 100 times. The court hearing was set for next Friday, and after the legal separation, Mark planned to commence relationships with the 3 women. He suggested that indulging in pleasures with them might help him find forgiveness for Sarah's affair with Tony and understand the satisfaction it brought her. Mark expressed the hope that a lasting connection with the new relationships could provide the love and support he had believed he had with Sarah. Mark informed the 3 women that it was time for them to leave, assuring them that he would be in touch individually. He then went into the house to gather a few belongings, preparing for a stay at a hotel until Friday, when either he or Sarah would officially move out. Unable to form coherent thoughts, Sarah remained seated by the pool, now crying softly. Mark emerged through the patio doors, placed his suitcases down, and approached her. Sarah wasn't sure what more he had to say, but it quickly became evident. Mark reminded her of the consequences he had forewarned for her lover. As it turned out, when she supposedly canceled on Tony the previous day, he pursued a relationship with the well-endowed blonde coworker he warmed up with every Wednesday morning from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., his prelude before their rendezvous. It seems Brenda, Sally, and Linda will have a similar effect on Mark, hoping it transforms him into a love-making god for them. By the way, the blonde was Gino Margarella's wife. Gino took offense to Tony's involvement with his wife, and he, along with a couple of his associates, subjected Tony to a severe beating. Tony's face is now a mess, with a few remaining teeth and some broken ribs. Gino even allowed Mark the privilege of delivering a significant blow to Tony's groin. The outcome? It's doubtful Tony will produce any more hot seed. And there's skepticism about his ability to engage in lovemaking activities again. Mark, of course, will deny any involvement in Tony's fate. Moreover, Friday being his golf day conveniently provides Mark with an alibi through his brother and friends. Wishing Sarah a great life, Mark informed her they would meet in court the following Friday. That day, Sarah was left alone in tears. Within the next 2 hours, she packed her bags and headed to her mother's place. The divorce process took 7 months, leaving Sarah devastated and sinking into deep depression. Contrary to what he claimed about the other ladies, Mark had no intention of following through. Instead, he found solace in 2 golden retrievers and ultimately discovered unconditional true love.
Story 2.
I'm Grant Oster. While pursuing my MC degree in chemistry in graduate school, I crossed paths with Laura. I fell in love instantly. It took her about 6 months, just before earning her MA in art history, to reciprocate, but it happened. Although neither of us was particularly experienced, as far as I was concerned, our bed life was excellent, and she never voiced any complaints. We married less than a year after her MA graduation, securing jobs in the same city. She taught at a community college, while I taught part-time at a state university and worked part-time with a science consulting firm. After 3 years of marriage, I left the university and worked full-time as a consultant, specializing in explosives. One of my clients was the federal government, and during the birth of our first daughter, Angela, my government work involved extensive travel. I understand it was tough on Laura, but I did propose quitting for a full-time teaching job at a local college which had tried to recruit me multiple times. However, Laura appreciated my job's financial benefits and the lifestyle it afforded us, encouraging me to persist. Her smiling mantra was, "I can survive, I'm self-sufficient." Even with the birth of our second daughter, Grace, 2 years after Angela, my travel persisted. I again suggested a career change, but Laura insisted I stick with consulting, considering the additional responsibilities of raising 2 children. When our daughters turned 5 and 7, my schedule eased, leading Laura to return to work. She secured an administrative position at the local university, primarily affiliated with the liberal arts college. For reasons I never fully understood but didn't bother me as it brought her joy, Laura developed a keen interest in photography. We now have over a dozen albums chronicling our lives with the kids. Update. During that time, Laura developed an unexpected interest in other languages, particularly Italian. She occasionally traveled for her job, notably to Chicago, where she attended meetings with benefactors, visiting professors, and the Art Institute. Additionally, She visited Gina, a college friend who had been an Italian exchange student and was now working in Chicago. When our children were 8 and 10, global terrorist activities made my skill set highly valuable to the federal government. I was recruited to work full-time for a 2-year period involving extensive travel. Before accepting the assignment, I discussed it with Laura at length, as it would require more travel for that period, possibly longer, with occasional absences lasting more than a month. Laura encouraged me to accept, expressing that she and the girls would miss me but would manage fine. Unfortunately, my government assignment meant I was away for 2 consecutive Christmases, when Grace was 9 and 10 and Angela 11 and 12, which was heart-wrenching. Laura took the girls to visit Gina in Chicago during this time. I maintained daily phone contact with them throughout their week-long visit, and they appeared content. Gina's relatives, including kids around our daughter's ages, were also present. Shortly before Thanksgiving, after over 2 years providing expertise to combat terrorism, I returned to full-time consulting with minimal travel. Laura continued occasional travel, usually about once a month for 2 or 3 days, mostly to Chicago. I gladly assumed all parental duties for Grace and Angela when she was away, although sometimes they accompanied her. It's expected that girls may grow closer to their mother, and although I had a good relationship with Grace and Angela, they rarely confided in me or sought my opinion on personal matters, contrary to their openness with Laura. It didn't bother me much, except for one thing. They never shared their experiences or were as talkative about their trips with their mother to Chicago. While not withdrawn, they never voluntarily provided information and often playfully changed the subject. Just before 18-year-old Grace went to an out-of-state college and Angela was a junior at another out-of-state college, Laura experienced a dark period. Upon discovering her tears on multiple occasions, I inquired about the cause. She attributed it to becoming an empty nester and suggested a shopping trip to Chicago with the girls. The trip was hastily planned and apparently required several long phone conversations with Gina, in Italian. Since I didn't understand Italian, I accepted Laura's account of the details without doubt, despite her being unusually emotional in the days leading up to their departure. Laura returned from Chicago after an additional 3 days, showing a more positive outlook, though not entirely back to normal. However, what truly surprised me was the limited number of purchases they brought back from their shopping trip. Upon inquiry, I learned that some items would be shipped later, including those sent directly to the girls' college addresses. I did observe a positive change in my bed life, which was never problematic, except during my prolonged absences when I remained faithful to Laura. The improvement coincided with Grace leaving for school. I attributed this positive shift to Laura and me growing closer as empty nesters, relishing the heightened lovemaking. Then, the pivotal event in my story unfolded. Update. I took an unplanned break from work around noon on a Thursday without informing Laura, who was at her usual workplace. Originally intending to play 9 holes of golf, my plans were thwarted by rain. Nevertheless, I was preparing for our upcoming anniversary and wanted to surprise Laura with a party. To execute this plan, I consulted with an event planner. Around 3 p.m., a delivery man arrived with a wooden crate marked fragile. Using a dolly, he brought it up the 4 front stairs to our house. The crate was addressed to Laura, and after signing for it, we positioned it in the living room with the "This Side Up" label properly displayed. The delivery of the crate struck me as unusual, and I couldn't fathom its contents. Examining the return address, which read Romano Photography Studios, along with an address in Chicago's Center City, I called Laura at work to inform her about the delivery. Initially quiet, she mentioned it was work-related and supposed to be sent to her office, with a plan to have someone assist in bringing it to the office the next day. While this explanation seemed rational, 3 factors raised suspicions. 1. The prolonged silence on the phone, unusual for the talkative Laura. 2. Her commanding tone when instructing not to open it, coupled with a stressed voice. And 3. Her overall uptight demeanor. Intrigued, I took photos of the crate and entered the return address information into my laptop. Upon Laura's return from work, she hurriedly inspected the crate, appearing suspicious of tampering. When I asked about its contents, she became vague and standoffish. Sensing something amiss, I offered to help open it, not only to be helpful, but also to gauge her reaction. However, she insisted on inspecting it at work for potential damage and a possible insurance claim. The next morning, before I left for work, 2 maintenance personnel from her college carefully moved the crate to a school van under Laura's supervision. When I shared my enthusiasm about the school exhibition, I was really trying to gauge Laura's response. She avoided eye contact and hesitated, mentioning uncertainly that she wasn't sure if that was the purpose, but assured me that she would let me know if they decided on an exhibition. The fact that she stuttered twice within 14 hours discussing the same topic, something unusual for the usually eloquent Laura, only fueled my curiosity even more. If that didn't pique my interest, I wasn't sure what would. The 5th aspect that unsettled me and raised suspicions was Laura's subsequent silence about the mysterious crate. Over the following 2 weeks, since the arrival of the enigmatic package, I gathered most publicly available information about Romano Photography Studios. This entity served as the U.S. business front for the globally renowned photographer Piero Romano, someone I might have vaguely heard of previously. Surprisingly, Laura, despite frequently discussing artists and photographers in connection with her photography hobby and university work, had never mentioned him. Piero Romano had a distinctive style, with most of his photos featuring both genuine photographic realism and various effects. He excelled in traditional photographic techniques like bokeh, blur, panning, rule of thirds, and long exposure, often combining multiple effects in a single photo. Additionally, he was the sole practitioner of a unique effect named after him, Romano Abilità Artistica, loosely translating to Romano's artistry. While challenging to describe in words, my attempt would be that it renders some features super realistic, while adjacent ones appear fuzzy, with changes in color or shade within the same object. However, this description falls short of capturing its true essence. While much of the information about Piero was intellectually and artistically intriguing, 2 astonishing facts stood out. The person overseeing administration at his studio was his niece, Gina Romano Bianchi, a friend of Laura's whom I had met only once and never in Chicago, known to me by her married name, Gina Bianchi. Additionally, Piero had died in a car crash on September 1st of the preceding year, and his memorial service in Chicago, before his body was sent to his ancestral burial plot in Italy, took place on September 6th. The timing seemed highly coincidental, Laura becoming emotional around September 2nd, supposedly about becoming an empty nester, and her and the girls' shopping trip to Chicago from September 5th through 8th. Though not a rocket scientist, I hold a master's in chemistry from one of the top 10 schools in the country, allowing me to piece it together. Despite the crushing realization, the only plausible explanation was that Laura had been involved in a genuine love affair with Piero Romano for at least 10 years, and my daughters were aware of it. Another intriguing detail emerged: a Chicago exhibition of Piero's most famous and stimulating works, including those owned by private collectors and some never seen publicly before, was scheduled for April 16th, 18th, 3 weeks away from when I discovered this information. I was confident that Laura would have a business trip to Chicago around that time, despite the 18th being my birthday, and the exhibition likely featuring the photographs from the crate delivered to our house 2 weeks earlier. Update. I have never felt more driven in my life to devise a plan for addressing my unfaithful wife and disloyal daughters. Due to my initial rage, which I needed to suppress to execute my intentions, I had to arrange a business trip for the night I discovered the incriminating information and 2 nights thereafter. I left a heartfelt message on Laura's work phone, apologizing profusely and promising to make it up to you before packing what I needed for a 3-night stay in a local hotel. Part 1 of my plan involved preparing all the necessary divorce papers to serve and file once I obtained the expected proof. Part 2 aimed to find a way to have someone visit and film the Chicago exhibition on its opening day, the 16th, which was by invitation only. Part 3 focused on organizing my affairs to secure as many material possessions and funds as possible. My sentiments toward Laura were indifferent, and I was very close to feeling the same about Grace and Angela. Part 4 was about ultimate revenge, even after the divorce's conclusion. Part 1 was no problem. I got a recommendation for a good divorce attorney, Gail Schiff. She advised me on everything I needed to do, and despite her recommendation for irreconcilable differences as grounds, she was willing to proceed with long-standing infidelity. Gail just needed a modicum of proof before she could file the papers, which I expected to have for her on the morning of the 17th. She could arrange for service on Laura by a law enforcement agent other than the county sheriff, along with a private process server to record events on the last night of the exhibition, on the 18th. For Part 2, I gathered as much information as I could about art appraisers with any relation to Chicago. I found a young appraiser named Roberto Milan trying to build his business. I went to see him in Chicago, talked with him for almost a full day. Roberto was familiar with Piero's work, certain he could get an invitation to the opening on the 16th, not averse to filming the photos I thought would interest me using a small, expensive, easily hidden HD camera I gave him. He conveyed his belief that he could provide a thorough and high appraisal of the photos I anticipated, his final words expressing the desire for a challenge to establish himself as a legitimate player in the art appraisal world convinced me to hire Roberto. For a segment of Parts 3 and 4, I cashed in 2 bearer bonds from our safe deposit box, totaling about $25,000. I couldn't remember if Laura knew about them, and she certainly wouldn't now. They were now worth together about $25,000. For another segment of Part 3, I provided my attorney with a complete list of all our assets, including an appraisal of our house. I took photographs of all Laura's jewelry and all contents of our safe deposit box, minus the bearer bonds, and provided my attorney with updated bank statements, credit card numbers, and outstanding purchases, retirement plans, and brokerage accounts. As a small segment of Part 4, on the last day of my supposed absence, I sneaked into the house. While Laura was at work, I took a magic marker and erased my face from every photograph in the dozen or so albums she had compiled over the years. Having never examined them in their entirety before, I was surprised to find that I appeared in no more than 15% of the photos. I also discovered 2 previously unseen photos that, even if I had come across them before, I would likely have considered innocent. They featured Laura, Gina, Grace, Angela, and notably, Piero. I made high-quality scans and photocopies of these photos before returning them to the album, marked with a black marker across them, an arrow pointing to Piero, and a legend declaring him the love of Laura's life. 2 days after my return from the business trip, Laura informed me that she had to go to Chicago from the morning of the 15th to the afternoon of the 19th. Expressing disappointment about not spending my birthday together, I suggested accompanying her, and she smoothly demurred, stating it was all business. She promised to take me to a resort the following weekend, asserting she would make it up to me in a way I hadn't ever experienced before. Following that statement with a kiss, at that point in time, I regarded her as a $3 fancy woman, so I just enjoyed myself. She gagged a little and obviously wasn't pleased, but pretended that she was, asserting it was only a sample of what's to come, darling. For all of Parts 1, 3, and 4 of my plan, there was a particularly risky aspect. However, the rest, especially after getting comfortable with and hiring the art appraiser, I was quite confident would fall into place. The risky part involved talking to Grace. Deciding that I needed a face-to-face with her, as soon as I dropped Laura off at the airport on the morning of the 15th, I drove the approximately 180 miles from Columbus to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where Grace was studying chemical engineering. Why Grace and not Angela? While both girls took after their mother more than me, Grace was by far more like me, at least in terms of how her brain worked, than Angela. Neither Angela nor Laura could ever conceive of a course of study in chemical engineering, closely related to my degrees in chemistry. Also, Grace had a harder time lying than either Angela or Laura, and although her failure to advise me of Laura's love affair with Piero suggested otherwise, or maybe not, she seemed more concerned with a nuclear family than Angela was. I called ahead to Grace's cell phone when I was about halfway there, and she actually seemed excited to meet. I told her I'd take her to a late lunch at a real restaurant. We met at the eatery of her choosing, about a mile from campus, and got a secluded booth. After our meal, I informed Gracie that there was a very serious matter I needed to discuss with her, and she displayed a perplexed expression. Before continuing, I asked for her assurance not to disclose our conversation to anyone, including her mom and Angela, until the day after my birthday. I made a request for her promise, raising my hand in the I swear position. She seemed surprised and commented, "Wow, sounds serious." "Okay, Dad, I promise, I swear," she assured, lifting her hand and attempting to force a smile. I then revealed, "I learned about your mother's involvement with Piero Romano, and I'm contemplating the possibility of a divorce." "Oh no, Daddy," she exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welling up instantly. I continued, "There's only one hope. I need to gather all the information you have about it, and I need you to undergo a DNA test." "What?" she exclaimed, nearly on the verge of a meltdown. Observing that the restaurant wasn't the appropriate setting, I instructed her to meet me outside, and afterward, we'd head to my car once I settled the bill. I located the waitress, paid in cash with a $1.20 tip, and discovered Grace, still in tears on the sidewalk. Once in my car, I felt the need to get to the bottom of things. I told Grace that the survival of our family depended on her opening up. After a brief period of crying where she struggled to express herself, and with me merely gazing at her, she began to share. She revealed that she didn't realize Mom was involved with Piero, or Uncle Piero, as we were told to call him, until she was 12, despite displays of affection every time we were in Chicago, especially at Christmas. Grace became aware of this through remarks Angela made. Angela knew before she did, but Grace lacked the sophistication to understand. When she confronted Mom, Mom explained it as an adult matter. She explained that she was in love with 2 men and insisted that I would understand when I grew up. Mom emphasized that I must never know about it because it could mean the end of our family, as I was deemed too insensitive, that's the word she used, to comprehend such complexities. Consequently, I was sworn to secrecy. Grace broke down again for a while and then continued to recount her experiences. She shared that she had hoped Piero's funeral would mark the end of it all and that you would never find out. However, after Mom made a scene at Piero's casket, Grace confronted her once more. She told Mom that if she jumped into someone else's arms, she would reveal the entire story to me. Mom rebuked Grace, questioning how she could think of her as a tramp. Mom claimed to have loved Piero and me, asserting that there would be no one else. She simply needed to honor Piero's memory. Grace believed her and prayed that the day when I found out would never come, confident that Mom would not engage in another love or even a closeness affair. Update. I gleaned additional details from her until I sensed it would be counterproductive to press further. She remained in anguish, just as I had anticipated, when I revealed the second purpose of my visit. I expressed my hope to reconcile with Grace's mother based on the information she had shared. However, I needed one more thing for clarity. I asked both of us to submit DNA samples to determine if she was my biological daughter. Grace cried, objecting, insisting that I was her only father. "I know that I'm your father," I reassured her, "but I have to know whether I'm your biological one too." Despite her protests, she eventually agreed. I presented her with the letter in the envelope addressed to the lab and sealed it. The instructions were to mail the results to both Grace directly and to me. As I drove her back to campus, she observed as I dropped the envelope into an express mail mailbox. When we hugged goodbye, she pleaded with me to forgive Mom and make it work. I explained that I couldn't promise that at the moment, as I don't lie like she does. However, I acknowledged that Grace had done her part to increase the chances that it would work. I reminded her not to tell anyone about our talk until the 19th at the earliest. She assured me with a smile, and then hesitated, mentioning one more thing. She explained that Mom and Angela would be attending a Chicago exhibition of Piero's works, some of which featured photographs of Mom, on my birthday. She conveyed Mom's apology for the unfortunate timing, but clarified that Mom had to attend as works inherited from Piero under his will would be displayed. Mom wanted Grace to join as well, but she had too much schoolwork. I smiled and casually responded, "I know, thanks for being honest." After another hug, she left. Unseen by her, I shed tears, realizing that my relationship with Angela was now as dead as the one with Laura. I hadn't yet decided if I could salvage it with Grace. Grace remained unaware that I had recorded our conversation in the car. There was one thing that Grace didn't know that would cause her pain and was a segment of part 4 of my plan. The swabs that I put into the envelope that was supposedly mine belonged to an Italian background janitor who worked in my office building, someone I had been friendly with over the years. I promised to pay to have his ancestry determined as a birthday present to him. He didn't even ask why I needed 3 swabs instead of 1 to do that. The one I did send in for testing his heritage showed that he was more than 80% Italian, with some Eastern and Western European small contributions, which made him happy. Why did I put an Italian's DNA in what was to be tested instead of mine? Because I wanted everyone to hurt. The reason I used an Italian is that during DNA testing, they can find out the heritage of both contributors, even if comparing 2 sets. And since Piero was Italian, I wanted everyone to conclude that he was the father of Grace, and if I could work it out, Angela. I crossed my fingers, hoping Grace wouldn't spill the beans. I spoke to her on the phone on the 16th and 18th, and she assured me she hadn't. And since I hadn't heard from Laura, I was sure that was true. Around 11 p.m. on the 16th, Roberto Milan emailed photos of the relevant parts of the Romano exhibit to me. They hurt me deeper than I thought they would. I shook like a leaf as I sobbed while viewing them. There was a series of 10 photos, increasing in size from the first to the last, all with distinctive Romano characteristics, including the last 2 brilliant Romano abilità artistica effects. The series was entitled Natale Amore, Christmas Love. What initially broke me out were the first 2 in the series, which showed 2 girls in the background of a photo of a woman who was unquestionably Laura. While there was blurring of the girls' faces, there was no doubt from their hair, what they were wearing, Christmas gifts from my mother, and relative sizes that it was Angela and Grace when they were around 9 and 11. In the second photo of the first 2, one of Laura's body was exposed, and she had what could only be described as a duck-me look. The next 3 in the series showed Laura in increasingly less dress, until in the final one she was, well, you can imagine. The second series started again with a photo where the girls were in the background, this time somewhat older, with the last 4 progressively risque until the second to last, which had Laura in an exceptionally suggestive pose, and the last one where the clear implication was that she had just been ducked and was in bliss. After I threw up, drank some ginger ale, and had a good cry, I looked at the photos again. If they didn't break my heart, I'd have to say that the last 2 photos were probably the best of their type I had ever seen. I read the text accompanying Roberto Milan's report. Sorry, I know that this will be hard on you. The collection is worth a minimum of $300,000, more likely $500,000. The second to last photo alone would bring $125,000 to $175,000 if sold separately. The last 2 photos are the best execution of Romano abilità artistica effects in history, not just in my opinion, but in that of at least 4 other appraisers and art critics that I overheard talking about them. I asked Gina if any were for sale. She put me in touch with the owner per Piero's will, not surprisingly, Laura. Laura said they weren't for sale at the present time because they were priceless, and the 4 where she was completely en dot would not be sold until after her passaway. I wouldn't want the general public, and especially my husband, seeing me like that while I'm alive, she said. The especially my husband with a laugh. Update. I sent the digital recording of Grace's words, along with Roberto's photos and words, via email to my attorney, Gail Schiff. She contacted me at 7:30 on the morning of the 17th. I conveyed that my petition for divorce was clearly justified, citing infidelity. I informed her that a law enforcement officer would serve Laura the following night at the gala. I added, "There's one thing I need to add," and mentioned that I would drop it off so she could include it when expressing it to the process server along with the divorce papers. I handed an envelope, addressed to Angela, to Gail. It contained a letter from me, a swab from the Italian janitor's cheek, a container with a new swab, and an envelope with express mail postage addressed to a DNA lab, accompanied by instructions. The letter to Angela conveyed the message that if there was any hope for a future relationship between us, she needed to swab the inside of her cheek, place it in the envelope addressed to the DNA lab with my swab already in it, and send it via express mail. The lab had instructions to mail the results directly to her at school and to me. I emphasized that even if she didn't desire a future relationship, she still needed to comply. If she didn't, I made it clear that I would ensure our finances were tied up for years, leading her to say goodbye to tuition, room and board, and expenses for the end of her junior year and her senior year at the expensive private college she attended. I pointed out that even if her feelings towards me matched her past actions and inactions, it was in her self-interest to do as I asked. I mentioned that Grace had already complied. The letter was signed, "Your father, Grant Oster." I was glad that I wasn't there when the reality hit the fan in Chicago on my birthday. The process server reported to Gail that Laura and Angela were all smiles as they hobnobbed with the public at about 9 p.m. on the 18th. They were perplexed when they were handed the envelopes by the law enforcement officer as the process server with him took photos. They opened up the envelopes on the spot. The law enforcement officer left, but the process server stayed behind, taking more photos until he was kicked out. The photos he emailed to Gail, and Gail to me, showed Laura sinking lower and lower onto the ground, ultimately landing in a fetal position, and Angela first distraught, then angry, and then trying to tend to her prone mother. Angela called me the morning of the 19th. After expressing her disgust with the way I handled serving the papers, I responded strongly, using language I had never used with her before, expressing that it was tough, and she should tell it to someone who cares. Following this, she stated that she wasn't inclined to do the DNA test. In a sarcastic tone, I questioned whether she didn't want to find out who her biological father is, as opposed to the one who has been supporting her all these years. She replied, affirming that I am her father. In response, I expressed uncertainty, stating that maybe I am, maybe not. However, I emphasized that one thing is certain. I've already instructed my attorney to freeze all of her mother's and my accounts. I assured her that there would be no money for her education or living expenses since she's 20 years old in the future, unless she mails that envelope with her cheek swab. Now that I think of it, I mentioned to her that I would need a video of her swabbing her cheek, putting it in the envelope, and mailing it, all at the same time, in order to believe her. This was due to the lies she had told me over the years. I emphasized that I hadn't lied to her. She retorted, pointing out that I hadn't told the whole truth, as my sister would have her tuition paid. I expressed my displeasure, stating that she seemed to be as unpleasant as her mother, and I had no intention of wasting time discussing it further because it disgusted me. I gave her an ultimatum: either do as I say and email me the video, or this would be the last conversation we ever had in her life.
After that, I forcefully hung up the phone. It's satisfying to have a landline where slamming the phone down makes a statement, unlike a cell phone where pushing the red button provides no emphasis. The mother did not attempt to call me from the 18th to the 21st. She likely delayed her return to Columbus for 2 days, consoling herself with her close friend Gina. The excitement at the exhibition on the 18th made its way into 2 local Chicago papers, complete with a photo of Laura, seemingly provided by the process server. Amid the urge to expel my stomach contents, I found some amusement. It was apparent that Laura had visited the house, which I no longer considered a home, on the 22nd. I deduced this as the envelope I had left on the new front door, reinforced with steel and a changed lock, similar to the side and rear doors, had vanished. My attorney's message on my cell phone indicated the need for a discussion. The envelope was addressed to Vile Ducking Slot, an assumption I believed Laura would recognize. My brief message inside conveyed, "Hey, contact your attorney regarding the retrieval of your personal belongings. The sooner we sell the house and conclude our sham of a marriage, the better. I'll resist any attempt by you to return to this house until it is sold. Consider doing something decent for once in our farcical relationship, and don't resist it, even though economic reasons seem to be your sole motivation, given your lack of love or respect for me. Your formerly clueless ex, Grant. P.S. The doors are booby-trapped. Any unauthorized entry will start all of your previous family albums on fire." It required a court appearance by the attorneys for something to be worked out with respect to living arrangements. I probably could have gotten exactly what I wanted if I didn't put that P.S. on the note to the slot, but I couldn't help myself. We finally, through our attorneys, agreed to both vacate the house and immediately put it on the market, with the amount of our temporary housing expenses considered in the division of assets. Laura tried to be difficult in the monetary negotiations, but she had no bargaining power because she acquired her precious photographs from Piero while we were still married. When I demanded 5 photographs, she could choose one, then me, etc., until all 10 were divvied up. According to her attorney, she got hysterical, especially since by that time, she had seen how I had doctored the family photo albums. At Laura's insistence, we took Roberto's appraisal of the photographs, one done by an appraiser hired by her, and one by a neutral appraiser. Hilariously, Roberto's was the lowest one, costing her $200,000 more than if she had accepted his appraisal. Since this was seriously cutting into what she would end up with, she offered me 2 of the photographs that she chose. However, she rescinded that offer when I had my attorney tell hers that I agreed as long as she had them delivered to the local firing range and she watched what I did to them. When all was said and done, by the time the divorce proceedings had concluded, Laura was left with her personal possessions, half the furniture, and 1/4 of the sale price of the house. Nothing else, including no alimony, but a suspended jail sentence. More about that later. We did agree to jointly pay all of the college expenses of Grace and Angela until they graduated, but nothing more than that. As for Angela and Grace, as expected, the DNA results came back that they were not my biological daughters. That infuriated Laura so much that she almost had a stroke. I talked to Grace about it, not Angela, who had complied with my request solely to get her college expenses paid, and apparently was happy with no future relationship with me. My daughter conveyed that her mother claimed the DNA test results were incorrect. According to her, Mom asserted that during her marriage to me, she never had any close relations with anyone other than me and Piero. Additionally, she insisted that she never even met Piero before our daughter was born. I responded by questioning why, if that were the case, our daughter's father had Italian ancestry like Piero, while my family lineage is entirely Dutch on both sides. I expressed my skepticism, highlighting that her mother has proven to be a pathological liar throughout our more than 24-year relationship, deceiving me about her love for me. Despite all this, she mentioned that her mother desired another DNA test. I explained to my children that the DNA test wasn't going to happen since they were not minors, and it was unrelated to the divorce. I clarified that I merely wanted to know the truth in my mind, and I wanted both of them to be aware of it. I reminded them that they witnessed me swabbing my cheek, putting the swab in the envelope, and then mailing it.
In response to my daughter's request, I mentioned that her mother's desire for a face-to-face conversation wasn't something I would entertain. I informed them that I instructed my attorney to ignore her repeated requests. I questioned why I would have any reason to engage in a conversation with her. My daughter pleaded with me not to use derogatory terms for her mother and expressed her continued love for her despite her faults. She asked me, as a favor, to talk with her for an hour. I conveyed to Grace that I couldn't comply with her request. While I had forgiven her and desired to maintain a relationship with her, I made it clear that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that would lead me to engage in a conversation with her mother. Update. Now for Laura's suspended jail sentence and getting only 1/4 of the proceeds of the sale of the house. After my phone conversation with Grace about the DNA test and Laura's desire for a talk with me, she did something stupid. I thought that she might pull something, so I hooked up and walked around with a panic button connected directly to a private security company. One night, a woman knocked on the door of the condo that I was renting during the divorce proceedings until the final financial details were worked out. I didn't see the 2 big guys and Laura standing out to the side when I looked through the peephole. As soon as I opened the door, the 2 big guys burst in and grabbed me, but not before I pushed my silent panic button. After being forcefully seized, they pulled me to a chair and secured me to it while Laura came in and the other woman departed. Laura expressed regret for resorting to such measures, attributing it to my refusal to meet with her and redo the DNA test, which she insisted was incorrect. Following this, she initiated a conversation with some upbeat remarks, claiming she always loved me and asserting that her affection extended to Piero as well. She contended that her heart was expansive enough to encompass love for both of us. She realized that we were past the point of reconciliation, but just wanted to get things off her chest. As she was talking to me, she was holding a swab up. Obviously, she was going to force a DNA sample from me. It really irritated her that I made no verbal response whatsoever to anything that she said. I refused to even acknowledge her presence, trying my best to avoid all eye contact. Fortunately, as she was about to have her 2 goons pry my mouth open for a DNA swab, There was a response to my panic button. The security company had called the police, and 3 cops, with weapons drawn, barged into the house. They found me tied up, and one of the miscreants had illegal items in his pants pocket. I explained the situation. The cops ignored Laura's plea to simply let them go. They meant no damage, and they arrested the 3 of them. The little kidnapping event didn't play well with the judge in our divorce proceedings. After she let it be known that if she had to rule it would be really bad for Laura, I got the division of assets and other considerations set forth above. The criminal court took pity on Laura since it was her first offense. She got a 2-year suspended sentence and a $10,000 fine, which was from her share alone of the marital assets. The 2 guys didn't fare as well because they had shady histories. One got a year in prison before parole was possible, and the one with the illegal items got 5 years before parole was possible. Part 4 of my plan did not end when the divorce was final, although I will not admit here or anywhere else that I had anything to do with it. Just karma is what I always respond when asked about it. 18 months after the divorce was final, I was on a cruise of the Caribbean with a 32-year-old hot little divorcee who loved to be treated right and richly. She looked too much like Laura at that age and was too hot for me to look for a permanent relationship with her, but she was fun to be with, even though she wore me out dating. While I was dating on the cruise, Laura's apartment was broken into while she was at work. The place was trashed. Some items were stolen during a break-in, including the second most provocative and valuable Romano photo of Laura. More items were destroyed than stolen, however, including 7 of the other 8 remaining Romano photos and all of the family photo albums. Upon my return, I became a suspect. While it was impossible for me to have committed the crime myself, since I was on a boat 2,000 miles away, Laura insisted to the cops that I paid someone to carry it out. As soon as the cops approached me and hinted that I was a suspect, I refused to talk to them and sought legal representation. After scrutinizing my phone and financial records, which naturally excluded the 2 cashed-out bearer bonds that were never part of the divorce estate, they found no evidence that I could have paid anyone for the act. Furthermore, there was no association found with anyone capable of committing such deeds. 6 months after their initial contact with me, it seemed that the cops practically gave up, even though I am sure that Laura continued to pester them. Once the statute of limitations expired, I threw a party, my "It's All Finally Over" celebration, attended mostly by friends. My parents were no longer alive, but my brother, his wife, my 2 nephews, my new love interest. Melody, Melody's 2 adult children, and Grace, her husband, and my granddaughter were present. I have had no relationship with Angela, was not invited to her wedding, and wouldn't have attended even if invited. I learned from Grace that Angela's husband caught her cheating, and she is in the early stages of divorce proceedings. Laura gave Grace an ultimatum: either sever all ties with me or with her. To everyone's surprise, including mine, Grace chose me, likely because she was convinced that Laura was, as I had represented, a pathological liar. More importantly, Grace recognized the negativity of her mother, throwing her relationship with her paramour in her daughter's face and having them lie to cover up her cheating. Grace didn't want her children exposed to that attitude. Only one thing has caused friction between Grace and me in the last 5 years. I disclosed the truth about the DNA testing. She was initially upset with me but forgave me, just as I forgave her for her duplicity over the years. She was actually very pleased that I was her biological father, and I had another DNA test done to provide additional confirmation.
Story 3.
After my dad passed away, I discovered his will and took back the house my mom tried to kick me out of to make room for her boyfriend who she had an affair with. 3 weeks ago, my dad passed away after being sick for a really long time. He had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis a couple of years ago, and he put up a good fight, but eventually he just couldn't do it anymore. And we lost him. It was a huge blow to me emotionally because I was a lot closer to my dad than my mom. I, 18 male, did not know how to feel. And I was just beginning to cope with my grief when my mother decided that she was going to kick me out of the house so she could move her boyfriend in with her. Within the span of 1 week, I lost my dad, and I also found out that my mother had been having an affair with a coworker all along. I don't know if my dad knew about it, but honestly, it doesn't even make a difference. I was disgusted when she brought home her boyfriend just 4 days after my dad's passing, and we had a huge fight. After he left, she told me that this affair had been going on for a really long time, pretty much ever since my dad had been diagnosed. And I did not know how it was to have a sick partner. So I had no idea how difficult it was for her, which is why I had no right to judge her for finding love elsewhere. She claimed that she knew that she was going to lose her husband at one point, so, in her opinion, there was nothing wrong with what she was doing. It was quite pathetic of her, and I told her so. The next day, I paid for it because she told me that I had to leave, and she didn't want any filth from the past in her home anymore, and she wasn't just referring to me. She and her boyfriend had started packing a bunch of stuff from my dad's room in the morning, and by the time I woke up, there were a bunch of boxes in the front yard. My mother told me that wherever I was going, I could either take the boxes with me or I could leave them there so they could burn them, but either way, it was all going out of their house. They gave me a couple of hours to pack all my stuff so I could leave. I decided to utilize my time packing my belongings instead of arguing with them because, judging by my mother's behavior, she was too far gone. I did not want to put down my dignity by speaking to her. We had pretty much stopped getting along a couple of months before my dad passed away because she had been fighting a lot with him. And I did not think it was right to keep arguing with him about petty things and be so horrible to him, especially when we knew that he was not going to make it. And after I found out about the affair, I had lost all respect for her, so I was quite glad to be leaving. I made a few phone calls, and after some time my girlfriend told me that she could speak to her parents and let me stay with them for a couple of weeks until I got back on my feet and made some other arrangements. I am very grateful for that. Since I've been living with them ever since my mother kicked me out, and they've been very kind, especially my girlfriend, since we've only been dating for 3 months, and she really didn't need to do this. But I'm very thankful for her. Anyway, on the day that I left, along with my own belongings, I also took the boxes that my mother had thrown out, which were full of my dad's belongings. I figured that I definitely could not let them burn it, since that would mean losing the last bit of whatever my father had left behind. It ended up with my room being extremely cramped because of all the stuff that was in there, but it was worth it. For the past couple of days, I had been avoiding even looking at those boxes, let alone going through them. The reason for that was quite simple. It reminded me too much of my dad, and I was just not ready to go through it. I knew that it would end up with me crying on the floor because I missed him so much already, so I had been avoiding it like the plague. But 2 days ago, I made up my mind that I was going to go through some of the boxes, no matter how hard it was. And I got incredibly lucky, because the first box that I picked was full of documents and paperwork from my dad's room before he was moved to the hospital in the last few weeks of his life. He was working out of his room in the house since he was in no shape to go out every day. My father was working as a tax consultant in a huge firm, so there was a lot of paperwork about that. And I didn't understand most of it, so I just kept it aside. I kind of made my way to the bottom of the boxes, and there I found a blue manila file with my name on it, and that was it. What I found in there is going to finish my mom, and I'm here for it. On going through the contents of that folder, I found out that my dad actually had left a will, and my mother probably had no idea. Or maybe she did and just wasn't telling the lawyer. Not just the will, I also found a bunch of other documents, including the deed to the house, which said that it did not belong to both my parents but only to my father. After reading the will, I realized that my dad had left the house and all the money that had remained in his account to me. My mother had received his car, which was a big deal because my dad drove a pretty nice car, and the ownership of their vacation home. I realized that my mother had absolutely no right to kick me out of the house because it did not even belong to her anymore, or at any point in time. First, it belonged to my father, and now it belongs to me. So far, my dad's lawyer had told me that his assets were going to remain frozen until the court had come up with a way to decide how his assets were going to be divided. However, after I found those documents, I called him up immediately and told him what I had found. So, I invited him to my girlfriend's house and asked him if it would be possible for me to move back into my own house because my dad clearly stated in the will that the house belonged to me, not my mother. He told me that I was definitely free to do that if I wanted to because my mother had no right to kick me out in the first place. At least not without proper notice. That was all that I needed to know. He could deal with the execution of the will, but I was going to deal with the situation with my mom. I called her up immediately afterward, and I told her that I had found out about the will that my father had left. He had stated that the house was going to be left to me, and so was all the money in his bank account. She was silent for a couple of minutes and said that it did not matter to her. But I told her that now that the tables had turned, I wanted her to leave the premises because the house had never really belonged to her. Neither had she ever done anything to earn it. She had been horrible to my dad, and now she was being horrible to me, so I told her that I wanted her out by the end of this week. And that's when she started crying. To be honest, I had actually expected her to start arguing with me because that's how she has always been, argumentative and nasty to everyone around her. Instead, she started begging me not to say anything or do anything because she had convinced her boyfriend to move in with her by telling him that she would handle everything for him. Apparently, her coworker had also been married but had recently filed for a divorce, and his ex-wife was demanding a huge amount of alimony, which was fair enough because he had cheated. So, he had been worried about it, and my mother had told him that she would handle it all for him, which meant that she would let him stay with her so he did not have to worry about where he would live or about rent and other miscellaneous expenses. He could just focus on his divorce. Now, if I came up to them and said that the house did not even belong to her, she would be screwed. So, if I decided to talk to her boyfriend, not only would she end up without a place to live, but she would also end up alone. I'm not a cruel person, so I told my mother that she was free to continue acting like she had the means to salvage the situation for her boyfriend, but I definitely did not want her to live in my house anymore. So, I told her that I would not breathe a word of what she had said to me just now to anyone if she promised me that she would leave the house by the end of this week. I honestly don't care where she went, I just wanted her out of the house so I could move back in. Then she started telling me that this was not fair because it was straight up blackmail and I couldn't do this to her. But I brought up how unfairly she had treated me just a couple of days ago. So, it was pretty laughable that she was expecting me to think about her situation right now, and I did not think that I was being unfair. After arguing with me for a bit, she started crying on the phone and said that she just couldn't believe that I was being this way with her just because she had wanted to be happy in her life for once. She said that she hadn't even wanted to get married to my father, but she was already pregnant with me, and so her family had forced her to. Apparently, my father had never treated her well. He had always been too involved in his work and never had enough time for her. So now, she was just trying to have a happy life with her boyfriend, and the only reason she had even kicked me out was because she knew that I was just like my father, and I was not going to stand for her happiness. And all that I was doing was proving her right. I didn't know what to say to her at that point, so I just told her that she had 1 week, and then I hung up. I have been feeling kind of guilty since then. I don't know why, but hearing her cry like that on the phone just made me feel very bad. I don't know if it's because I'm actually doing something worth feeling guilty over, or maybe it's just because I'm a sensitive person. I can't stand to hear people cry. I'm a bit confused, so I'm here to ask, Aita, because I told my mother that she and her boyfriend had 1 week to give up their house? Edit, I don't have anybody from my family living in the state, so I couldn't ask them for help and I had to rely on my friends. I have spoken to my grandparents since I'm starting college in a couple of months, so I'm going to need their help to cover the expenses. After I had explained to them the kind of situation I was in because of my mother, all of them had cut her off. I can't say she's any worse for it since she never really got along with her own parents and only had a civil relationship with her in-laws. And about the will, I don't really know exactly why my father had left the house and all his money to me or why he hadn't spoken to his lawyer about it. I did ask my dad's lawyer about it, and apparently he had been pushing for him to create a will ever since he had been diagnosed, but my dad kept saying that he would do it later. Now apparently what he had left was a holographic will since there were no witnesses or a lawyer involved, and it might make it easier for my mother to contest it, but we will cross that bridge when we come to it. Thankfully, in the state that we live in, even wills like these are considered valid, and I'm guessing that my dad must have known about it. As for why exactly he had left the most important things to me, I'm guessing it's because he had probably written this document when he was at home, and my mother had been fighting with him a lot over nothing in particular. She was just fighting with him because she could, and he couldn't exactly leave her no matter how frustrated he felt. I guess that's why he made this decision, and I think it was a good choice. Anyway, to answer your questions, I don't really know my dad's exact reasons, but this is my theory. Update 1. Hi, so I'm still living with my girlfriend, and after reading the comments, I decided to change my mind. I'm still going to demand that my mother move out of the house, but I'm going to change the terms of my condition a bit. After posting that edit, a lot of you said that I should probably think about the fact that my mother can contest the will, and that would lead to a lot of trouble for me. I thought about it, and you guys were right, I wasn't thinking about it at first. So, I decided to call my mother back, and I told her that I was now ready to give her 6 months to find a place and move out of the house. She seemed pretty surprised when I said that because we hadn't spoken since our last conversation, so she didn't have an explanation for this change of heart. But I also told her that since I was giving her 6 months, I also wanted her to promise that she was not going to contest my dad's will. Hopefully, 6 months would be enough time to prove the validity of the will in court, and eventually, we would be able to start the division of the assets. I guess 6 months will be enough for my mom's boyfriend to figure out his divorce as well. Personally, I would have much rather preferred to cause a lot of trouble for my mother and ask her to leave within a week and make sure that she felt just as awful as I had. But, well, needs must right now. It's more important for me not to act rashly because that would only lead to trouble for me and not her. She has told me that she's going to think about it before agreeing to anything, and, well, let's see what she says. Update 2. Hi. So 3 weeks back, I told my mother that I wanted her to promise me that she would not contest the will, and I would let her stay in the house for 6 more months. I was going to be leaving for college in 3 months anyway, so I figured that for those 3 months, I would just ask my grandparents to send me some money so I could get an apartment because I did not want to bother my girlfriend by living with her for so long. But her parents insisted that I had to stay with them, and even though we have only been together for 3 months, my girlfriend and I really love each other, so she said the same thing, and my living situation was sorted. I was in no hurry to have my mother leave the house, since it didn't even make sense. I was kind of hoping that she would agree to my terms so I could get my dad's lawyer to sign off on it as well, because if she entered a legal contract, she wouldn't be able to back out of it. I was looking forward to hearing back from her with good news, but instead she called me up today, and the first thing that she asked me was if I expected her to sign any paperwork or contracts for this condition that I had. I immediately said yes because I did not want to mislead her, and I definitely did not trust her, so this was a given. She thought about it for a couple of seconds, and then she told me that if she had to sign a contract, then she was not interested in this agreement. That really annoyed me because it essentially just meant that if she knew that she had to stick to it, or there would be consequences, then she was not sure about whether she was going to be able to make any promises. I was very blunt with her, and I told her that if she was not ready to sign off on a legal agreement with me, then my deal was off the table. I told her that I did not trust her in the slightest, and she should not be surprised since her behavior in the recent past has been nothing short of absolutely horrible towards me. I thought that she was going to argue with me, but she just told me that she agreed, but she also didn't trust me since, after all, I definitely was my father's son. I didn't understand what that had to do with everything because, as far as I was concerned, neither my father nor I had ever done anything to be referred to as untrustworthy. The only thing that she had against my dad was the fact that she had been forced to marry him because she got pregnant with me, and my grandparents thought that it would be the best way to go ahead with the situation. That's not my fault, and neither is it my father's fault. If she didn't want to marry him, she should have fought for her rights. Besides, I'm not even sure how true that was because I had spoken to my grandparents about it, and they had said that they hadn't exactly forced her, but they had just advised her against raising me on her own because, at the time, she was really young, and my parents seemed to love each other. So both my grandparents had suggested that they get married, but there was no pressure on them as such. And the other problem that my mother had with my dad was that he worked too much. I don't even think that's a real problem because, of course, he had to do it. My mom did not even work in the first few years of their marriage and only started working recently, around 7 years ago. She was able to get that job because one of her friends and her husband had started that company. Otherwise, she wouldn't have even been able to find that job that she constantly kept bragging about. Right now, she could say that she was an independent woman, but that was only because my dad had supported her from the beginning, so she had no right to tell me that she did not trust me because I was my father's son. I was really annoyed with her, so I told her that she was free to do whatever she wanted, but since she was not going to sign a contract, I wanted her out of the house. Then she was about to say something, but before she could, I hung up. She tried to call me several times after that, but I'm just too annoyed to speak to her right now. In the past half an hour, she hasn't called again, but I know that she will, but I'm only going to speak to her after I cool down. Update 3. My mother did not call me again after the last conversation we had, which I had mentioned in my last update. I kept waiting for her to call for the next 2 days, but she only called me today. I was kind of nervous because I didn't know what to expect. To be honest, on one hand, I really wanted her to sign off on the deal that I had suggested, that I let her live in the house for 6 months until she's able to make other arrangements for herself, and in return, she doesn't contest the will. I thought I was being really fair, but after the last argument we had, I didn't know if she was going to agree to it now. So, when she called me up today, I tried to be as polite and civil as possible, because this was not just about her, I had something to lose as well. I had been hoping for good news, but unfortunately, as soon as I picked up the phone, she told me that she had made her decision, and she had decided she was not going to sign any contract. Instead, she was definitely going to be contesting the will, and she had even spoken to a lawyer regarding it as well. I was taken aback because that obviously meant that she was not going to be living in the house anymore since it belonged to me. And I told her that if she was going to contest it, it meant that she was no longer going to live in my house anymore. I thought that it would bring her back to her senses, but she just told me that I had no right to take her out because so far, the will hasn't even been approved as valid, and she had a point. But it also meant that she had no right to kick me out either, since we are in a bit of a gray area right now. So, I told her that we were probably just going to have to all live together until the probate was over. Obviously, that idea made her really uncomfortable, and after a couple of seconds, she told me that she was going to find a place to live. But she was going to take her own sweet time because I had no right to tell her what to do. Once again, I told her that she was free to take as much time as she wanted, but I was going to move back in by the end of this week. Then she started yelling at me and said that I was being a complete nuisance and she had done absolutely nothing to deserve this kind of harassment that I was putting her through. I almost did a spit take at that point because my harassing her was the biggest joke of the century. Anyway, she just kept trying to yell at me, but I just hung up because I didn't think we had anything more to talk about. She has made her decision, and I don't think I can influence it anymore. So I'm going to do whatever I think is the right thing to do, and she can't stop me either. And she just has a measly stupid boyfriend who's going through a divorce himself, so I don't think he's going to be any help to her. Whereas I have the rest of my family, and even my girlfriend and my friends on my side. In fact, I think I'm going to tell him the truth about my mother because I think I have held back for long enough. But now, since she has made up her mind, I have decided to be an inconvenience. I don't think there's any reason for me to keep this secret anymore. Update 4, I did it. I told my mom's boyfriend the truth about the situation with the house. I don't think he had any idea so far. I don't know how, since he was living with my mother. And this is a pretty big deal to be hiding from your boyfriend. Besides, she was in touch with me, and I'm sure he would have had questions about it. But I guess she's really good at hiding secrets, and I shouldn't be surprised since she hid her affair really well for a couple of years. It was not very difficult to find a way to contact him. I just had to look him up on Facebook, and once I had him, I sent him a message along with the proof. I also told him exactly why I was telling him the truth right now when I hadn't done so for the last couple of weeks, since I was trying to negotiate with my mother. But she had made it very clear that she was not interested, so I felt like he had the right to know what the truth was. I sent that message 2 days back, and today I finally heard back from my mother. I was expecting some outburst of the sort, but I didn't think it would come so late. Anyway, she tried to call me in the morning, but just to frustrate her, I decided to block her. Then I proceeded to block her on social media as well. Eventually, with no other way to reach me, she decided to create a false email account and send me a message from that address. She told me that she hoped I was happy now since I had created a bunch of drama between her and her boyfriend for no reason, and he had decided to leave her and go back to his wife to try and work things out. And he was blaming her for the entire situation. She's right about that, so I don't even understand what she's mad about anyway. It was a really long message about how she was going to make sure that I paid for this heavily, and all I could think of was that she could bring it on. Truth be told, she doesn't scare me anymore. I've already lost whatever I had to lose, and now there's only one way to go, and that's up. So, I'm really looking forward to the court case. Update 5. Hi guys. So I haven't updated you on what has been happening in my life for the past year, and I think it's about time that I do so. Like I said, I was looking forward to the court case. So, my mother did actually end up contesting the will, and the case went to court. My dad's lawyer and I decided to fight as hard as we could, and long story short, after 8 long months, we were finally able to get a verdict in our favor. The will was definitely valid, and it was going to be upheld. This happened 2 months ago, and I'm still really happy about it. She had to give up the house, and we don't have any contact with her anymore, so I don't know what she's up to. But I'm glad that she got her karma. Even her own parents are not in touch with her anymore, so I'm pretty sure that she can't be leading a happy life right now. My neighbors told me that the day she left, her boyfriend had come to help her out, so I'm guessing that maybe they're back together again, because I'm pretty sure that no self-respecting woman would take back a man who had cheated. So, I'm sure that the guy's wife had rejected him, and he had to come crawling back to my mother to patch things up, and my mother, being the person she is, had gladly taken him back. Honestly, I'm glad that they're back together because they deserve each other. I'm pretty sure my dad's there, smiling at me from heaven, because I've proven myself to be his son. Resilient and strong, and always standing for the right thing. I'm in college right now, about to start my 2nd year. My grandparents are supporting me financially for now, and they're going to do so until I have a job, so I'm very grateful for them. I know a lot of you want to know what's going on with my girlfriend. She's also in college, and we meet on the weekends every time. We're even planning a short getaway, just the 2 of us, this weekend, so we're still going pretty strong, and we plan on taking this forward since we are pretty serious about each other. Right now, life is pretty peaceful, and I'm very happy that I'm at this stage because getting here was the hard part. After this, everything seems like a piece of cake.
Story 4.
The story begins years before, during a chilly autumn, when I first laid eyes on Claire. I was a naive 20-year-old, ambitious and carefree, while she carried herself with the confident poise of someone accustomed to admiration. She was introduced to me at a mutual friends gathering, a spirited event filled with laughter, debates, and clinking glasses. We bonded over shared jokes and a love for classic literature. By the end of the evening, I was smitten, convinced she was unlike anyone I had ever met. Our early days were idyllic. We spent countless hours wandering the city's quieter streets, discovering hidden cafes and laughing over the smallest things. Claire had a sharp wit and a knack for storytelling, which drew me in deeper. Though I was utterly captivated, there were moments when her sharp tongue cut unexpectedly, leaving behind a sting I chose to ignore. Love has a way of dulling red flags into faint warnings. As our relationship deepened, I introduced her to my family. My sister, Sammy, took an instant liking to her, or so it seemed. Sammy was outspoken, and although she was supportive of us, I could tell she held something back whenever Claire was around. I chalked it up to sibling protectiveness, brushing aside her subtle hints that Claire might not be as sincere as I believed. A year after we married, cracks began to appear in our perfect facade. Claire's career demands increased, leaving her little time for us. I noticed she had become more distant, choosing late-night work calls and solo weekends, away under the pretext of self-care. At first, I told myself it was the natural ebb and flow of marriage, a temporary phase. I didn't want to confront the idea that something more sinister might be lurking beneath the surface. Then came the whispers, cryptic remarks from colleagues, fleeting glances exchanged between Claire and her phone during dinners. My gut told me something was wrong, but every time I broached the subject, she dismissed it with irritation or turned it around, accusing me of being overly suspicious. I started questioning myself, wondering if my insecurities were clouding my judgment. By the time I found myself at that dimly lit bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, my suspicions had evolved into an oppressive weight. Yet I had no hard evidence, only a collection of half-formed thoughts and vague patterns. Little did I know, that evening would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would unravel the truth I was too afraid to confront. I sat there, mulling over the past weeks, replaying fragments of moments that didn't add up. Despite all my pondering, I couldn't pinpoint anything concrete to confirm my gut feeling that she might be deceiving me. It wasn't one glaring incident, but rather a collection of little inconsistencies, subtle hints that refused to align. Something was off. I was certain of that. Yet I had no definitive proof. No names, no faces, no clear situations to validate my unease. At times I even began to doubt my own sense of reality. Am I overthinking everything? I wondered. Could it be that I'm just concocting these wild stories in my head, imagining betrayal where none exists? Yet the knot in my stomach tightened. It was more of a gut instinct than concrete knowledge, an intuitive sense that something wasn't as it seemed. Maybe it was the start of something new, or perhaps just a fleeting indiscretion. But the more I obsessed over these thoughts, the more convinced I became. These suspicions had been festering in my mind for what felt like weeks. But when had this actually started? How long had I ignored the signs? I took another sip of my Jack Daniels, the ice rattling in the glass as if signaling that it was time for a refill. The bartender caught my glance, nodded, and promptly replaced my drink with a fresh double on the rocks. He offered a faint, knowing smile, one that suggested he'd seen this look of mine countless times before. There was something oddly comforting in his silent understanding. I took another drink, the whiskey's sweet burn warming my throat. I need to calm down, I told myself, glancing around the bar. The atmosphere was subdued. A low hum of indistinct chatter filled the room, mingling with the gentle clinking of glasses. It was a joyless place, populated by faces devoid of distinction, a sea of ordinary people. Only one person stood out, a woman in her 40s, slightly overdressed for the setting. She sat across from an older man who wore an expression of cautious hope. The way she carried herself made it clear she knew she had the upper hand. Meanwhile, the rest of the patrons lingered, seemingly waiting for the rain outside to ease before returning to lives just as gray as the weather. I sat alone, unsure what I planned to do. A voice broke my train of thought. "So, what's the story?" I turned toward the source. It was her, Sammy. Her sharp eyes pierced straight through me, making my words falter. She stood under the dim barlight, her rain-soaked coat dripping as she shrugged it off. "What are you doing here, Sammy?" I asked, my voice stiff. "I was worried about you," she replied, stepping closer. "I figured this is where you'd be. Do you want to talk?" Her unexpected presence threw me off balance. I scrambled to collect myself. "Worried about me? Why? What are you talking about?" She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before responding. I studied her face, searching for any hidden motives, unsure if I could trust her. As I sipped my drink, I ordered her a cocktail. The bartender, ever the performer, served it with a flourish, offering her a smile that lingered a bit too long as his eyes wandered. Sammy didn't acknowledge him, waiting until he moved away before speaking. Her eyes, cautious and steady, locked on mine. "Well," she began, "it's about how you've been acting lately. You seem like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Don't you think it's time you tell me what's going on?" Her words hit me hard, and I couldn't hold her gaze. She'd always had this uncanny ability to read me. That's what I admired most about her. We understood each other in ways most people never could. Sure, we had disagreements, but we never fought for long. Honesty had always been our thing, at least to an extent. Sometimes things left unspoken carried just as much weight. "Sammy, I'm fine. We're fine. There's nothing to worry about," I said, trying to sound convincing. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. My heart sank, but I pressed on, pretending not to notice the skepticism etched across her face. Sammy, calm and deliberate, took a slow sip of her drink, her gaze fixed on me the entire time. Setting the glass down on the table, she leaned forward, clasping her hands tightly in front of her. "I know," she said, her voice low but firm. I froze, my stomach twisting. "You know what?" Her tone sharpened. "Come on, Steve, don't play dumb. I know what's going on. Let's stop pretending and just be honest." Her words carried enough weight to catch the bartender's attention. I saw him glance our way, his ears pricked like he was hoping for something scandalous. Sammy noticed too, and her expression hardened. "This isn't the place for this conversation," she said, her voice low. "Let's move to one of the booths." As we stood to relocate, I noticed the bartender's disappointed expression. We settled into a booth tucked into the corner, sitting across from each other like opponents preparing for a match. "All right, what do you think you know?" I asked, leaning back in my seat. She didn't flinch. "Steve, don't bother lying to me. You're terrible at it, and we both know it. We've been through too much together for you to try and pull that now. Just say it. Whatever it is, you need to let it out." Her words hung in the air between us, the weight of them heavy and inescapable. I knew I couldn't dodge the truth forever. I met Sammy when I was just 17. Back then, she had a small infatuation with me, though that changed when I began dating her older sister, Claire. Claire, 3 years older than me, and I became a couple at 20. Sammy and I always got along well, which often seemed to irritate Claire. The two sisters couldn't have been more different, like night and day. But their fiery arguments over the years made it clear they shared a similar stubborn streak. 2 years later, Claire and I tied the knot. At the time, I believed we had a bright future ahead. We both had decent jobs, made enough to live comfortably, and seemed to have everything going for us. Meanwhile, Sammy, who had spent her youth living boldly and without regrets, had begun to settle down. By 25, she had grown into someone thoughtful and grounded, the kind of person any man would consider himself lucky to know. Claire and I have been married nearly 5 years now. Our anniversary is coming up next month. At least, that's if we even make it that far, I thought bitterly. Sammy, vibrant and beautiful, had become more than just my sister-in-law. She was someone I trusted, someone I considered a close friend. Now, as I sat across from her, my vision blurred with unshed tears. I wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her earlier statement, "I know," echoed loudly in my head, a simple phrase that carried unbearable weight. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against mine before gripping it firmly. Her touch offered comfort, but it also deepened the ache in my chest. "Steve," she began softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. "If you won't say it, I will. Claire is cheating on you. I think, deep down, you've known this all along." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Yeah," I finally whispered. "I know." "What are you going to do about it?" she asked bluntly, her gaze unwavering. I looked away, unwilling to meet her eyes. My mind scrambled for some way to deny the truth, to convince myself that everything was still fine. If I didn't fully acknowledge it, then maybe it wasn't real. And if it wasn't real, it couldn't hurt me. Sammy watched me carefully, her expression softening as she read the turmoil on my face. "Steve, I care about you, but you need to stop hiding from this." "It's probably just a misunderstanding," I muttered, trying to sound convincing. "It can't be what it seems." I was clinging to my delusions, but Sammy's patience snapped. Before I could react, she reached out and slapped me. Hard. The sharp sting lit up my cheek, and the sound of the impact drew the bartender's attention. He froze mid-motion, glass in hand, watching us warily. "Is everything all right over there?" he asked cautiously. I raised a hand without looking at him. "We're fine. No problem here." The burning sensation on my cheek lingered, her handprint still vivid against my skin. I rubbed it absent-mindedly, trying to process what had just happened. Across from me, Sammy's anger seemed to dissipate almost as quickly as it had flared. Her expression softened, and her voice dropped, carrying an almost apologetic tone. "I'm sorry, Steve," she said quietly. "But you're so infuriating sometimes. I can't stand seeing you like this, pretending nothing's wrong. You deserve better than this. We have to face it." Her words hit me like a cold splash of water, cutting through the haze I'd been clinging to. I said nothing, gripping my glass tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. She leaned forward, her voice more measured now. "Let me explain. You've been suspecting something for a while, haven't you? Even if you didn't admit it, you felt it. Well, a few weeks ago, I noticed something strange. Claire got a call while we were hanging out, and instead of answering it in front of me, she left the room. That's not normal, is it? Not for sisters. I nodded slightly, though my throat felt tight. Sammy continued. That's when I started paying attention. Later, I had a chance to check her phone. She doesn't even lock it. She's that careless. The call was from someone named Robert. Robert? I repeated, my brow furrowing. I don't know anyone named Robert. Neither do I, she replied. But I kept an eye out. A week later, I figured out who he is. He's some guy she used to know before she met you. Apparently, he got back in touch through social media, and they've been talking ever since. I gripped the glass tighter. So, they're just old friends catching up? That's how it started, she said, her tone heavy with frustration. But it didn't stop there. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Are you saying something happened? Yes, she said firmly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I struggled to process her words. But didn't you notice anything sooner? I mean, wouldn't it have been obvious? At first, I wanted to believe it was harmless, Sammy admitted, but the more I watched, the more it became clear. She's been pulling away from you, Steve. It's like she's trying to create space between you two. You've been too focused on ignoring the signs to see what's right in front of you. Her voice grew softer, but no less resolute. Steve, you're my friend. I care about you deeply. But you can't keep living in denial. This isn't going to fix itself. The weight of her words pressed down on me like a boulder. I took another drink, letting the whiskey burn its way down as I finally mustered the courage to speak. How far do you think it's gone? Or, do you know? Sammy hesitated, her expression a mix of sadness and frustration. I think you already know the answer. Her words hit harder than the slap. My chest tightened, and I realized there was no escaping the truth anymore. Sammy's gaze locked on mine, her eyes glimmering with a mix of emotions she struggled to hide. For a fleeting moment, she hesitated, then broke eye contact. That slight pause told me everything I needed to know. When? How? Where? I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Anger churned inside me, threatening to explode. Sammy exhaled deeply. I know she's seen him at least 3 times over the past 2 weeks. I wasn't completely sure at first, but 2 days ago I found out for certain. A friend of mine who works with Claire mentioned it, completely by accident. Apparently, Claire met him twice for lunch and once for dinner last week. I nodded grimly, piecing the clues together. That explains it. There were a couple of times recently when I called her office to ask about lunch and she wasn't there. Then, last week, she said she had to attend some seminar. She got home after midnight, claiming it ran late and that her team went to a hotel bar to unwind afterward. She showered before bed that night and we didn't... Well, nothing happened between us. The weight of realization pressed down on me, each detail cutting deeper into my chest. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself into a picture I didn't want to see. Damn it all, I muttered through clenched teeth. Sammy leaned forward, worry etched across her face. Steve, listen to me. Don't do anything reckless. Don't let her push you into doing something you'll regret. My face hardened as I absorbed her words, my emotions shifting into something dark and unrecognizable. Sammy's concern deepened as she watched my transformation. I won't stand for this, I said coldly, my voice low but simmering with fury. This stops now. There's no place in my life for betrayal. She'll pay for what she's done. And so will he. Sammy's voice wavered with emotion as she tried to reach me. Steve, please. Take a step back and think about what you're doing. Don't rush in without a plan or you'll make things worse. Her words broke through my anger, nudging me toward reason. Slowly, the white-hot rage began to cool, just enough for clarity to creep in. At least I wasn't imagining it, I murmured. Do you think she's with him right now? Sammy hesitated, then nodded. Tears welled in her eyes, one slipping down her cheek. Yes, she whispered. That's why I came to find you. I couldn't sit by and let you stay in the dark. My anger flared again, hotter this time. I slammed my fist on the table, the sound drawing stares from across the bar. I raised a hand toward the bartender who returned my glance with a knowing half-smile. How the hell could he possibly understand? Do you know where they are? I asked, the question tinged with desperation. Sammy shook her head. No, not exactly. But I'll see my friend again tomorrow and try to find out more. I do know this guy is married with kids. I don't have his address yet, but I'll dig up whatever I can. I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. As I brushed away the tear on her cheek, I said, "Thank you, Sammy. I know this isn't easy for you, and I appreciate it more than you know." Her voice trembled slightly. "What are you going to do?" I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. "Not what I want to do, at least not yet, but I'll make sure this ends. When I act, it'll be final. No loose ends, no regrets. They'll both face the consequences. In the meantime, I'll protect what's mine and gather the proof I need to do this right." Sammy watched me, her concern evident as I drained the rest of my drink. I caught the bartender's eye, signaling for another round. He poured us each a fresh glass and approached with a slight nod. Before Sammy could say anything else, I raised a hand to silence her until the drinks arrived. Sliding a bill across the counter, I muttered, "Keep the change." The bartender accepted the tip without a word and moved on. "How long do you think you can keep this up?" Sammy asked cautiously. "Seeing her? Being around her?" "I've been doing it for weeks already," I said flatly. "She hasn't noticed a thing. I'll keep up appearances until I'm ready." Sammy drained her glass in one swift motion and stood, slipping on her coat. "I need to go, Steve. Let's talk tomorrow. I'll see what else I can find out." As I helped her with her coat, the closeness stirred a pang of emotion. Damn it, she looked so much like Claire. Her tear-filled eyes met mine as I kissed her cheek. "Go home. I'll be fine. I'll call you tomorrow," I said. She nodded, offering a faint smile before stepping into the damp night. I sat back down, staring into my glass as the reality of the situation washed over me. One thing was certain, they would both pay. And when it happened, it would be swift, calculated, and without mercy. I barely remember anything after that. Somehow, I woke up in my own bed, my mouth dry and foul as if I'd been chewing on cardboard. My head pounded as I tried to sit up, the room spinning slightly around me. Turning over, I realized the other side of the bed was empty. Claire wasn't there. As my senses slowly came back, I caught the faint sound of movement downstairs. Dragging my legs over the edge of the bed, I stood shakily, gripping the nightstand for balance. What the hell did I do to myself last night? I wondered, wincing at the memories of whiskey-fueled excess. Stumbling into the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face, hoping to wash away some of the lingering fog. After forcing myself to freshen up, I headed downstairs, my body aching with every step. In the kitchen, there she was. "Morning, sweetheart," Claire said casually, her tone light but with a trace of curiosity. "Rough night. What did you get up to?" The response that ran through my mind was sharp and venomous. "Wouldn't you like to know, you liar?" Instead, I forced a neutral tone. "Just met up with an old friend. Got carried away, that's all." I poured myself a glass of orange juice and gulped it down, the acidity making my stomach churn, then refilled it for another round. "Oh, who was it?" she asked, her voice pleasant, but the question digging for something more. "Bob," I said without missing a beat. "An old buddy from way back. Haven't seen him in years. He's in town for a couple of days on business." "Bob?" she repeated, a flicker of something crossing her expression before she turned away. "Yeah, you probably remember me mentioning him. College days. We played football together, tall guy, dark hair, even asked about you." Claire's brow furrowed slightly, her confusion poorly masked. Doesn't ring a bell. But hey, the important thing is that you had a good time," she said, settling into a chair across from me. I watched her carefully, the conversation with Sammy from the day before playing on a loop in my mind. Keeping my voice steady, I asked, "So, what about you? How was your night? Anything interesting? When did you get home?" Her eyes met mine, steady and composed as she delivered the lie. "Oh, nothing exciting, just work stuff. I grabbed a bite to eat afterward and came home around 9:30. The lie hit me like a brick. I knew she hadn't been home at 9:30. I was still there at 10 before heading out to the bar. Strike two, I thought grimly. "I've got a few errands to run this morning," I said, setting my glass down deliberately. "Might be late tonight, so don't wait up. Bob and I still have some catching up to do." Her smile was faint, her tone carefully neutral. "You should invite him over if he's around for a while. It's always nice to meet your old friends." "Oh, I'm sure I will," I replied smoothly, matching her calm. "He'd probably love to see you again." "Well, maybe it'll come back to me who he is," she said lightly, tilting her head. "Now go on, you don't want to be late. Do you need me to drive? You had a bit too much last night." "I'm good," I said, brushing off the offer. Just need to grab a cab and pick up my car from the bar. I headed upstairs to get dressed, downing more orange juice and popping a couple of painkillers before leaving the house. Claire was still getting ready as I walked out the door. My day was packed, but the truth was clear. This charade wouldn't last much longer. The image of Claire and her so-called Bob fueled my anger, my fists clenching involuntarily. One way or another, he'd pay for this. They both would. Work was a chaotic mess of calls, emails, and endless meetings. My secretary handled what she could, but by mid-morning, I finally had a moment to breathe. I shut my office door, leaned back in my chair, and started reviewing my finances. In less than 15 minutes, I had secured my accounts, moving cash where she couldn't touch it. Then I scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer. The meeting was set for a few days later, giving me just enough time to gather more information. Not that I needed much, just enough to give me leverage when the time came. Claire had her own bank accounts and credit cards, so I didn't need to worry about those. But the joint account? That was an easy fix. I made sure to close any loopholes, locking down what little was left. If she wanted to take anything, she'd have to fight for it. By the time I finished, my head felt clearer. I knew what I had to do. Claire might think she could play me, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without consequences. My personal account was secure, with only a modest balance left in it. The bulk of the funds had already been withdrawn and tucked away where no one could touch them. Since Claire and I didn't have kids, a potential separation would likely be a clean break. Still, I held on to the faint hope that we could salvage our relationship. If, and only if, she owned up to her betrayal and asked for forgiveness. Without that, there would be no future for us. The thought of ending things left me with a hollow ache in my chest. Sitting at my desk, I replayed everything, the steps I'd taken, the decisions I'd made. Did I need more proof of Bob's involvement, more concrete evidence? Or was what I already knew enough to bring them both down? The shrill ring of the phone snapped me out of my thoughts. "Yeah?" I answered, my tone clipped. "It's me, Sammy," she said. "How are you holding up, Steve?" "Oh, you know," I replied with a heavy sigh. "Keeping busy. A lot on my mind, plans, thoughts, trying to piece things together." "Well, I've been doing some digging," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "Turns out his name is Bob Stones. He's married, with kids. I even got his address and know where he works. My friend at Claire's office didn't suspect a thing when she shared this with me. She's seen them together more than once, and Steve, they're not exactly subtle. Apparently, they've been getting close." "Has your friend actually seen them together?" I asked, my voice tightening. "She has," Sammy confirmed. "They were at the Ramada the other night after that seminar. They stayed behind after everyone else had left. My friend said it was obvious they were way too comfortable with each other." I clenched my jaw, nodding even though she couldn't see me. "This is a start. There's probably CCTV footage from the hotel. Send me the details you have. I need to figure this out. It's eating me alive." Within minutes, Sammy texted me the information. I immediately looked up Bob's social media profile and found his photo. His face seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I'd seen him before. Glancing at the time, I realized it was almost lunch. On impulse, I decided to call Claire, partly to test her and partly to stir things up. My stomach churned as the phone rang. When she answered, her cheerful tone felt like a slap in the face. "Hi, sweetheart," she said brightly. "Hey, babe," I replied, forcing calm into my voice. "What are you doing for lunch? Thought we could meet up if you're free." "Oh, I'd love to, but I have an appointment in about 30 minutes that'll run through the afternoon," she said smoothly. "I'm just going to grab something quick from the store next door." "An appointment, huh? What's it about? Anything interesting?" "Just routine stuff with a new client," she replied, her voice light. "I think it's with someone named Mr. Stones." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She didn't even try to hide it. My grip on the phone tightened as I struggled to keep my tone steady. "Are you there?" she asked after a moment of silence. "Yeah, I'm here," I said through gritted teeth. In my head, the rage was boiling over. "That's strike 3, Claire. You and Mr. Stones are finished. No forgiveness, no mercy, total destruction." Out loud, I managed to say, "Sorry, got distracted for a second. Anyway, I've got to go. Good luck with your meeting, and I'll see you tonight. Love you." "Love you too," she said before hanging up. I placed the phone down carefully, my knuckles white from gripping it so hard. My secretary poked her head through the door, breaking my focus. "Steve, I'm heading to the grocery store. Want me to grab you anything?" she asked. "Yeah, get me something big, hearty and full of red meat, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I need to sink my teeth into something. She gave me a curious look before nodding and closing the door. I could tell she thought I was acting strange, but I didn't care. Something was brewing, and she could sense it too. Meanwhile, Sammy had her own plans. She showed up at Claire's office, walking into the lobby just in time to see her sister step off the elevator with a tall, dark-haired man in his early 30s. Sammy recognized him immediately from the photo. It was Bob Stone's. Claire froze when she saw her sister. "Sammy, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. Sammy smiled innocently. "Oh, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see my favorite sister. Maybe we could grab lunch?" Claire's discomfort was palpable. "Well, Mr. Stones and I have a business lunch, so maybe another time," she replied, clearly flustered. Bob extended a hand, his expression polite but wary. "Hi, I'm Bob Stones. Nice to meet you." Sammy shook his hand, her smile razor-sharp. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Stones. How long have you known my sister?" Bob hesitated, confused by the question. Before he could answer, Claire grabbed Sammy's arm. "We really need to get going. See you later, okay?" she said hurriedly, pulling her toward the door. Sammy watched as they stepped into a waiting taxi. Claire glanced back nervously, her face a mix of guilt and frustration. Sammy smiled to herself, already planning her next move. Back in my office, I tore into a hefty meat pie, savoring the rich flavor as I carefully mapped out my next move. Sammy had confirmed that Claire was out of the office for the entire day, so I called her secretary to double-check. It was true. Claire wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Perfect. Financially, everything was secure. My accounts were locked down, and a locksmith was ready on standby. My lawyer was prepped, waiting for the final pieces of information I promised to provide. Tonight, the wheels would start turning. I'd let Claire and Bob stew in uncertainty for a while before delivering the final blow. My father always said, "Be direct, don't play games, hit hard and hit once." I hadn't needed that advice in years, but now it felt like the right time to apply it. Tonight, I'd lay the groundwork for what came next. When Claire walked through the door that evening, she was as stunning as ever. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the faint trace of men's cologne clinging to her. I kissed her cheek lightly, watching the slight hesitation in her expression. "Where are you headed? Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice casual but curious. "I'm fine," I replied. "Just dealing with something. Jerry invited me to a poker night with some of the guys from work. Thought it might help clear my head. I won't be out too late." Without waiting for a response, I left, heading straight to Jerry's. He was the kind of friend you wanted in your corner. Loyal, no nonsense, and always ready for action. In his garage, I changed into dark overalls and pulled a ski mask over my head. Tonight wasn't about conversation. Tonight was about action. Jerry and I exchanged a silent nod before climbing into a beat-up sedan he'd borrowed for the night. It was unremarkable in every way, blending perfectly with the suburban streets as we made our way to the address Sammy had given me. Bob Stone's house was quiet, with only one light glowing faintly from inside. We parked a short distance away and waited, tension thick in the air. Eventually, the front door opened. Bob stepped out, got into his car, and drove off. Jerry followed at a safe distance, his hand steady on the wheel. We already knew his destination, so there was no need to rush. When we arrived at the sports field, we parked discreetly and watched as Bob went through his routine, collecting a bucket of golf balls and heading to the practice area. It was also predictable, down to the exact time. The car was quiet except for the faint hum of the radio. Kenny Rogers' voice filled the air briefly before Jerry reached over and switched it off. We sat in silence, watching, waiting. My fingers twitched with the urge to act, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rushing in would only complicate things. The parking lot gradually emptied until only a few cars remained. As Bob packed up his clubs, Jerry made his move. He slipped out of the car, moving with practiced stealth. Bob didn't notice until it was too late. One swift punch to the jaw sent him sprawling. Jerry, a former cage fighter, unleashed a barrage of blows, targeting Bob's ribs and groin with calculated precision. Bob crumpled to the ground, gasping in pain, but before he could cry out, Jerry shoved him into the trunk of his car and slammed it shut. "Smooth as butter," Jerry said, peeling off his gloves as he returned to the sedan. "Thanks, Jerry," I said, genuinely grateful. "I owe you for this." "Don't sweat it. This was clean, no cameras, no witnesses, just like we planned." He smiled faintly. "Now let's head back. We've got a poker game waiting, and the guys are probably wondering where we are." We drove back to Jerry's, where a few friends were already gathered around the table. The night passed in a blur of laughter and card games, The stakes kept intentionally low. These weren't the kind of friends who'd betray you for a pot of money. Their support was comforting, but I couldn't fully relax. My mind was already racing ahead to the next steps with Claire. I stumbled into the house just after 1 a.m., feigning the effects of too much booze. Jerry had sent one of the guys to drop off my car, completing the illusion. Claire was still awake, sitting stiffly in the living room. Time for an Oscar-worthy performance. "Why are you still up, love?" I asked, slurring my words slightly. "Told you I'd be late. You okay?" She eyed me suspiciously, her arms crossed over her chest. "You've been acting strange lately, Steve. What's going on? Is there someone else? Something else?" I laughed, the sound hollow to my own ears. "Nothing like that, my petal. Just work stress. It'll all be over soon." She studied me, her frustration evident as she tried to piece together my cryptic response. I threw my jacket toward the coat rack, missing completely, and collapsed onto the sofa with an exaggerated groan. "You're impossible," she snapped. Her voice carried the edge of someone who was seconds away from saying too much. "What?" I asked innocently, leaning back and closing my eyes. "You worry too much. Everything's fine." Her anger simmered beneath the surface, but she didn't press further. When we finally went to bed, I pretended to fall asleep almost instantly. I could feel her staring at me in the darkness, the tension between us thick and unresolved. She didn't know it yet, but the games were just beginning. The next morning, Claire was already downstairs making coffee by the time I stumbled into the kitchen, playing up the perfect hungover husband. "Morning, darling," I groaned theatrically, rubbing my temples. "My head feels like it's been through a blender. Got anything for this?" Without a word, she tossed a bottle of headache pills in my direction. I grabbed a mug of coffee and took a long sip, watching her carefully. She seemed composed, but her eyes gave her away, guarded, tense. Her phone sat on the table, and I wondered if she was expecting a message. She caught me glancing at it and stiffened, her fingers twitching as if resisting the urge to grab it. "Needs a charge," I said lightly, sliding the phone toward her. "Wouldn't want you missing anything important." A flicker of panic crossed her face before she quickly masked it. I took another sip of coffee and casually left the kitchen to get dressed, leaving her to stew. As I climbed the stairs, I could feel her gaze boring into my back. Alone in the kitchen, Claire's thoughts churned. Could he know? No, that's impossible. It had only been a few weeks. A handful of lunches, a couple of dinners, and a few private moments at the hotel. Nothing serious. It was just a little excitement, nothing that could ever lead to trouble. Or could it? The thought gnawed at her. When was the last time we even slept together? The realization hit her like a slap. Maybe this was the problem. Maybe she needed to fix things before it was too late. By the time I came back downstairs, Claire had made up her mind to reconnect, but I was already heading for the door. She reached out, trying to pull me into a deeper kiss than usual, but I sidestepped her with a smile. "See you later, love," I said, waving as I backed out of the driveway. In the car, I let a smirk creep onto my face. The game was just beginning. At 11 a.m., I decided to text Claire just to see how she'd react. "Sorry I've been distant, love. Lots on my mind, but it'll all be sorted soon. Love, Ox." I leaned back in my chair, waiting for the response. Just after lunch, Sammy barged into my office, her face pale and full of urgency. "Steve, what the hell is going on?" she demanded. I looked at her calmly. "What do you mean?" "Bob Stone's," she said, lowering her voice. "He was found knocked up and locked in the trunk of his car this morning," Claire told me. "She's absolutely shaken." A slow smile crept across my face. Terrible. These things happen sometimes. It's always worse when it's someone you know, but what can you do? Sammy's eyes narrowed. "You did this, didn't you?" "Did what?" I asked, my tone nonchalant. "You know what I mean? Is he badly hurt?" I shrugged. "I heard he's got a few bruises, nothing broken, just roughed up a little." Her voice softened. "So you didn't—" I cut her off. "No, Sammy, I didn't lay a finger on him." She exhaled, clearly relieved. "Claire said his company called to cancel their meeting because Bob's in the hospital. His wife called them. Isn't that sweet?" I chuckled. "Adorable. Next time, things might not be so easy for all of them." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Accidents," I said cryptically. "Can happen anywhere." That evening, when I got home, Claire's car wasn't in the driveway. No note, no text. I called her. "Hey, love, where are you?" I asked cheerfully. "I'm visiting a friend in the hospital," she replied quickly. I'll be home soon. Hope she's doing okay. See you soon, I said before hanging up, not giving her a chance to elaborate. About 30 minutes later, Claire walked in. Her face was pale, her expression uneasy. How's your friend? I asked casually. Nothing too serious, I hope? She hesitated. Oh, no, just some bruises from a fall. She'll be fine in a few days. That's good, I said, pouring her a cup of coffee. Claire sipped the coffee, her eyes darting toward me. One of my colleagues was attacked, she said abruptly, testing the waters. I feigned shock. Attacked? What happened? He was knocked up and left in his car overnight, she said, watching me closely. That's awful. Did they catch who did it? Was anything stolen? She shook her head. No, nothing was taken. It's strange, really. Fortunately, Bob wasn't seriously injured. Her mistake hung in the air. I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch until she realized what she'd said. Her face reddened, and without another word, she left the room, heading upstairs. I watched her retreat, my mind racing. She was unraveling faster than I'd anticipated. It was time to escalate. The game had just gotten interesting. As Claire headed upstairs, I called out after her. I need to step out for a bit. Won't be long, I said, already grabbing my keys. She paused mid-step but didn't reply. I drove straight to the address Sammy had given me, Bob Stone's house. When I knocked on the door, a petite woman with dark hair opened it. Her wary expression told me she wasn't expecting company. Mrs. Stones, I began, keeping my tone measured. You don't know me, but I need to speak with you about something sensitive. May I come in for a moment? She hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing for me to follow her to the living room. Once inside, I got straight to the point. My name is Steve Ryland. I hate to say this, but my wife, Claire, is having an affair with your husband. Her face froze, the words hitting her like a slap. Slowly, she sank onto the sofa, her head dropping into her hands as tears began to fall. I knew it, she said bitterly after a long pause. I just knew he was back to his old ways. I'm divorcing Claire, I said, my voice steady. I've given her every chance to come clean, and she's done nothing but lie. I don't know how long this has been going on, and frankly, it doesn't matter. She betrayed me, and I'm done. Her eyes, wet with tears, sharpened as she asked, Does this have anything to do with the attack on him last night? I don't know anything about that, I replied firmly. But I'll be honest, I don't care. Whoever did it, good for them. Her mouth twisted into a bitter smile. Wouldn't surprise me if he's been sniffing around someone else's wife, too. That's why we moved back here. Because he cheated before. I handed her the contact information for my lawyer and locksmith, then left her fuming on the couch. She didn't deserve to be blindsided like this, but I had bigger problems to deal with. My next stop was the hospital, just 10 minutes away. I walked through the lobby feeling a strange mix of tension and relief. A part of me felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and located Bob's room in a quiet corner. Slipping inside, I carefully shut the door behind me. Bob was lying in the bed, his face a swollen mess. One eye was completely shut, the other bloodshot and unfocused as it tried to make sense of me. His bandaged jaw twitched, as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came. Jerry had done his work well. I pulled up a chair, sitting close enough to ensure he felt my presence. You look like you don't recognize me, Bob, I said, my voice low but steady. Think for a moment. I'll wait. He stared blankly, clearly confused. Let me help, I continued. How many married women have you messed around with, Bob? How many marriages have you destroyed? Let's start there. I watched as understanding slowly dawned on his battered face. I'm married to a woman named Claire, I added, leaning forward. Does that ring any bells? He nodded weakly, the movement almost imperceptible. Good. Now we're getting somewhere. My voice dropped further, sharp as a blade. I came here to deliver a message from your wife. Bob's one good eye widened, his lips parting as if to speak, but nothing came out. I pressed on. She wants you to know it's over, I said coldly. The divorce papers are on their way, and she told me to say one more thing. Stay the hell away. She's had enough of you. A single tear escaped from his uninjured eye, trailing down his cheek. I leaned closer, my voice like ice. You ruined my marriage, Bob. You're the reason everything I built is falling apart. And this, I gestured to his bandaged face, this is just the beginning. We'll be seeing each other again, I promise you that. You'll pay for what you've done, again and again. Count on it. I stood, watching him tremble as he struggled to process my words. Just before leaving, I leaned in one last time. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I didn't do this to you. I let the lie hang in the air, knowing it would gnaw at him. For good measure, I slammed my fist into his face, hearing a satisfying crunch as his nose gave way. He gasped, his cry turning into a garbled moan. I followed with a swift punch to his groin, his body convulsing before going limp. Satisfied, I turned and left the room, the sound of his ragged breathing fading behind me. No one saw me leave, but if they had, they would have seen a man walking away with a slight smile. On the drive home, I forced myself to think clearly. The anger that had consumed me earlier was now under control, replaced by cold, calculated focus. Retaliation wasn't just an act. It was a strategy, a process I intended to see through to the bitter end. Yet, despite the satisfaction of taking my first steps toward revenge, the weight of what I'd lost lingered. My marriage was over, and nothing I did could change that. Claire had shattered everything we once had, and there was no putting it back together. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was parked where she'd left it earlier. I tapped the hood absent-mindedly as I walked to the front door, the reality of the situation sinking in. Sliding my key into the lock, I paused for a moment. This might be the last time I entered this house as her husband. My chest felt heavy as I stepped inside, bracing myself for whatever came next. The weight of the last few days pressed heavily on me as I walked toward the living room. From the doorway, I could hear the faint murmur of the TV. I paused, my eyes locking on Claire. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, her body stiff with unease. Her shoulders were tense, and her trembling hands clutched the fabric of her pants as though trying to ground herself. The air in the room was thick with tension. She glanced up at me, her eyes wide and fearful. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. I said nothing, brushing past her toward the bar. Pouring a generous glass of whiskey over ice, I took my time, letting her stew in the silence. Returning to the room, I set the glass deliberately on the coffee table and sank into the chair across from her. I watched her, my expression neutral, while taking a slow sip of the whiskey. Its warmth spread through me, but it did little to dull the sting of betrayal. I let the silence stretch, savoring her visible discomfort. She shifted slightly, her fear battling with a flicker of defiance. Finally, she broke. Straightening her spine, she tried to muster some semblance of control. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling despite the forced calmness. I didn't answer. Instead, I took another deliberate sip, holding her gaze. "Steve, talk to me!" she snapped, her voice rising with frustration. Setting my glass down with deliberate care, I leaned forward. "Fine," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I'll tell you where I was, if you tell me where you've been. Deal?" Her hesitation was brief but telling. We were two opponents circling each other, waiting for the first to make a misstep. When she finally answered, her voice carried a forced casualness. "I told you already. I was at the hospital visiting a friend. Why are you acting like this?" I smiled faintly, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "Of course you were. It's exactly what I expected you to say. Care to try again?" Her composure wavered, her voice tightening as panic seeped in. "I don't know what's wrong with you, but I have told you the truth." I leaned back, studying her carefully. "All right," I said evenly. "Let me tell you where I went. Maybe it'll give you some clarity about where this conversation is heading." I let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing, leaning slightly closer. "I also visited a friend, someone I didn't know very well until today, but now we're acquainted. She's a nice woman, really. Her name is Mrs. Stones. Does that ring a bell?" The blood drained from Claire's face as realization dawned. I didn't let up. Her husband, Bob, had a bit of a rough night, ended up in the hospital. Nothing life-threatening, just a few bruises here and there. "He'll be fine," I said, my tone laced with mock sympathy. "That's good news, right?" Claire's panic was written all over her face. What were you doing talking to her?" she stammered, even though she already knew the answer. "Well," I said, reclining in my chair, "it turns out her husband is something of a ladies' man. I thought she deserved to know the truth. Don't you think that's fair?" Her hands flew to her face, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh my God." I kept my tone light, almost mocking. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Can I get you something? A drink, maybe? Or do you already know enough about Bob Stones' extracurricular activities?" Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. I decided to spare her the struggle. "Let me make it easy for you," I said, my voice dropping, cold and steady. I leaned in closer, staring into her eyes. "I know." Her hand flew to her mouth as the words sank in. The color drained completely from her face as she processed what I'd just said. Her eyes darted to mine, searching for any sign of softness, any hint of forgiveness. She found none. I know about you and Bob, I continued, my voice low but cutting. I've known for a while, not long, but long enough. So if there's anything you'd like to say, now's your chance, before it's too late. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the TV in the corner. I waited, my gaze steady as Claire's world unraveled in front of me. I drained the last of my drink and rose to pour another, my movements deliberate, masking the storm brewing inside me. Are you sure you don't want one? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Claire shook her head, but I poured a second glass anyway, handing it to her as I sat back down across from her. She hesitated, then took a long sip, her trembling hands betraying her composure. Finally, she looked at me, her voice shaky as she spoke. It didn't mean anything, Steve. It was just Zex, she said, barely audible. I repeated her words, the disbelief thick in my tone. Just Zex? Of course, nothing at all, right? As if the vows we made to each other didn't mean a thing. The anger I'd been holding back simmered to the surface as she tried to downplay what she'd done. It just happened, she insisted, her voice defensive. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. Don't insult me, Claire. Nothing just happens. You made a choice. You planned it. You both agreed to betray me, to betray this marriage. You chose the time, the place. So don't sit there and treat me like I'm an idiot. She flinched at my words, her defenses crumbling. It was only twice, she blurted out, her voice rising with desperation. And honestly, it wasn't even good. It wasn't fun, Steve. I spent the whole time worrying you'd find out. Well, congratulations, I said coldly, my sarcasm slicing through the air. I finally found out. I hope it was worth destroying everything we built. Steve, please, she begged, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It didn't mean anything. We can get through this. I'll do whatever you want. Anything to fix this. I let out a harsh laugh, the sound echoing off the walls. It wasn't amusement. It was the bitter realization of how far we'd fallen. Claire's eyes widened, her pleading expression giving way to one of raw fear as she began to grasp the severity of the situation. You're sorry? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Sure you are. But let's be honest, Claire. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. If I hadn't found out, would you have stopped? No, I don't think so. Her lip quivered, but she said nothing. All the cliches come so easily, don't they? It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. Lies, Claire. Lies you've been telling me and yourself this whole time. The truth is, you're not the woman I married. I don't even recognize you anymore. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of my words sank in. Please, Steve, she whispered, her voice breaking. What can I do? I'll do anything. It's too late, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. We're done. While I was out, I called Sammy. She knows everything now. She'll be here soon to pick you up. Her face went pale. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice trembling. Are you really kicking me out? I stood, finishing my drink and slamming the empty glass onto the table. Go wherever you want. Back to the hospital to visit your boyfriend for all I care. Just get the hell out of my house. We're done. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Sammy standing there, her expression somber. Without a word, she followed me into the living room where Claire sat sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking with every ragged breath. Get her out of here, I said quietly. I can't look at her anymore. I hate what she did, but I still care enough to know I shouldn't be around her right now. Please, Sammy, take her. Sammy nodded and went to work, moving briskly to pack Claire's things while I poured myself another drink. For the next several minutes, I sat silently, listening to the muffled sound of my wife's sobs as her sister gathered her belongings. Within 10 minutes, Claire was gone, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of our life together. Later that night, I stood in the backyard, staring into the crackling flames of a bonfire. Everything Claire had left behind, her clothes, her photos, her letters, was reduced to ash. There was no way she would ever set foot in this house again. Good riddance, I muttered, finishing the last of the whiskey in the bottle before hurling it into the fire. The glass shattered on impact, feeding the blaze as it consumed the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. The fire roared in front of me, but it couldn't burn away the ache inside. Retribution would come, and it would help. But the scars Claire had left, those would take far longer to heal. The flames eventually dwindled, leaving only the faint glow of embers as I stood in the cool night air. The weight of the past weeks settled on me. Not just the betrayal, but the emptiness that followed. For years, I had built a life with Claire, and though it ended in ash, there was still a strange sense of liberation in the finality of it all. As the fire died, a light drizzle began to fall, washing away the remains of the night's turmoil. I turned toward the house, its shadows now quieter, more hollow, yet oddly peaceful. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, unshackled from lies and pretense. There was no revenge left to plot, no anger left to stoke. What remained was a simple truth. Endings are rarely clean, but they are necessary. And sometimes, from the rubble of what was, we find the foundation for something stronger. With a deep breath, I walked inside, leaving the door open just enough for the rain to wash away the last traces of smoke.